Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. The room Jon awoke and slowly drifted into focus, bringing with it memories from another lifetime. Every day of his childhood he had woken in this very same room, beneath the same canopy, beside the same mullioned window. Even the smell of cinders from the dead fire stirred his memories. Still drugged from sleep, he thought he might be dreaming, or that he had woken up in the past again, and any second now, Robb would come barreling through the door to drag him from his bed and out into the practice yard. He thought he might even hear his uncle's voice or the ringing of Mickon's forge, far below his bedroom window. Expectantly, he held his breath and waited, but Winterfell remained silent. The bedchamber door stayed closed, and the forge lay dormant and silent. No voices sounded from the galleries beyond, and in that deathly silence, he remembered the battle. He remembered that they really had taken back Winterfell, if not their absent friends and family. The knowledge that the dead were still dead made their victory seem borderline Pyrrhic. When he tried to move, his aches and pains served up a timely reminder of what had happened the day before. It seemed as if 1,000 cuts and bruises all cried out at once, and he fell, breathless, back into his feather bed. Momentarily giving up, Jon contented himself with lying there covered in his thick furs and staring out at the same patch of sky he watched as a boy. Only now it was white and heavy with the threat of oncoming snow. Winter had truly arrived. Despite the quiet, it wasn't overly long before a knock sounded at the chamber door after all. Curious, he sat up and bid the visitor enter. Half a heartbeat later, it was Sansa peering around the edge of the door. She came to him sporting a flourishing black eye, a split lip, and a gash on her head where she'd been hit by falling masonry. It reminded him that, thanks to Summer's enthusiastic participation in the battle, their crypts were now in near ruins. "Am I disturbing you?" she asked, still only peeking around the aperture. He shook his head. "Not at all. Come in." Raising a smile, she sat on the edge of his bed, while he shuffled aside to make room for her. "I didn't know if you would be sleeping in your old room or not," she said. "Force of habit," he explained, glancing around at the familiar space again. He still knew it like the back of his hand. "I'd wager you did too." "I feared the Boltons would have tainted this place," she admitted. "That I would feel their presence in the halls and the chambers, even in the godswood." Jon hesitated before saying anything, waiting to see if she would elaborate. When she did not, he said, "And have they?" "Been away," she replied. "But last night's fire changed things." After the battle, at evenfall, Melisandre had built a night fire from the Bolton banners, sigils, and furniture, and made of it an offering to Rosier. Fire consumed, she had told him, it destroyed, and it cleansed. For him as well, Winterfell had been cleansed of the Boltons, as their rags and devices went up in smoke. All traces of them had been devoured by the flames. "Good," he said, at length. "You said yourself. This is our home. The Starks have been in Winterfell for thousands of years, and a few months of Bolton misrule will change none of that." Sansa's gaze dropped as she shifted uncomfortably in her place. "Will the other lords see it like that? It's not as if they came rallying to our cause." As much as he wanted to allay her fears, he felt a cold weight settling in his own stomach at that. Only the Mormonts and Hornwoods had responded to their call. The Knights of the Vale, too. But they were not Northern lords and would play no part in helping them keep Winterfell. Capping it all, Rickon was missing and presumed dead. The strongest claimant to Winterfell was Sansa, still a girl no matter her role in kicking out the Boltons. Jon couldn't decide what would be more anathema to the Northern lords, a 6-year-old boy or a woman grown. "Even if Rickon lives, you must rule in his place until he comes of age," Jon stated. "He will need you. I think if you're able to hold your own against Robb's own bannermen, they will come to respect you." To his dismay, she looked stricken. "What about you?" Jon shrugged. "What about me? A Stark must hold Winterfell, especially now that the line has been broken." "You're a Stark to me." "But I'm not," he cut in, but not unkindly. "There must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and that's not just an empty boast. It means something, and it's already been broken once. Whoever is Lord or Lady of Winterfell now must be a true-born Stark, with the blood of the first men in their veins. Make sure the lords all continue to think of me as a bastard. Then there's no chance of them looking to me instead of you or Rickon." Sansa was still subdued, with Ramsay and Small John Umber dead. The only person who may know where Rickon is Master Tybalt. And I don't trust him, Jon replied curtly. He's sworn to the Dreadfort, not Winterfell. He just imposed himself on the place when the Boltons took over. But he knew he wouldn't have any choice but to trust the Maester. He was another kept in line through fear, Jon suspected, and no Maester owed anything to dead lords. Speaking of which, cousin, said Jon, unless I'm much mistaken, you now own the Dreadfort and all its lands and incomes. She blushed like a maid. The first thing I'm going to do is give back the lands Ramsay stole from House Hornwood, with more besides, as a mark of gratitude for their support during the battle for Winterfell. When Lady Hornwood's husband and sons died in Robb's war, Jon knew Wyman Manderly had bargained for her hand in marriage so he could annex her lands with his own. Then Ramsay happened, and Lady Hornwood had been forcibly married to him and left to die in a locked cell. It made Jon's stomach roil to think that Rickon, too, might have been bricked up in a satyr and left to starve, just like Lady Hornwood. He said nothing of that to Sansa, however. I'll give some of that land to Lord Manderly, too, she added, thoughtfully. What? Jon was aghast. What for? He didn't lift a finger to help us. Exactly, she cut in, laughing. We have something he wants, which means we have leverage over him. In return for his supporting us, he gets to farm and collect rents from land which is rightfully mine. If Baelish taught me one thing of value, it was how to play the game. Jon smiled, wryly to himself. See, you already sound like a ruler. Sometimes he was taken aback by how much she had changed. There was little of the starry-eyed girl left in her, but nor had she allowed the horrors she'd lived through to blacken her heart. While he pondered this, she was looking back at him most intently. You are a true-born prince of the realm, she said quietly. Tommen is a bastard, she cut herself off, before quickly correcting what she'd said. Actually, Tommen is a dead bastard. In his place sits a woman with even less of a claim to the throne. The only thing weaker than Cersei's grip on the crown is her grip on reality. And now, she's even lost the reach. My father comes before me, he reminded her, pointedly. If he wishes to take back the realm, then that's his war. My place is in the north with you and Rickon. If Rickon still lives, he thought to himself. While that dark thought flitted through his head, Sansa's eyes shone. Do you mean that? He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. The only reason I would leave your side now is to find Bran and Arya and bring them home to us. Sansa gulped, a choking noise deep in her throat as a single tear escaped her eye. Without saying anything, she tugged her hand free and wrapped her arms around him. He hugged her back, unwilling to let go for a long time. Winterfell was big. Bigger than the Red Keep, which, when Rhaegar was a boy, had felt like an endless labyrinth of halls, vaults, and secret passageways. But it could easily have fit within Winterfell's walls. It was also bloody cold, so he huddled inside his borrowed furs and lost himself in the spacious grounds. Ghost, his son's direwolf, accompanied him from a distance, a presence he slowly got used to as he gradually came to realize the depth of the bond between Jon and his strange silent wolf. Often, all Rhaegar could see were two burning red eyes among the snow, stalking after him and approaching only warily. Meanwhile, the dragons slept in the broken tower. The day before, after the battle, Sonar had roasted and gobbled down more than one fallen Bolton soldier. For some reason, it had taken him aback. However, it was the morning after now, and he had quite recovered himself. As such, after breaking his fast, he made his way over to the broken tower to check Sonyar, only to find Maester Tybalt hovering nervously near the entrance. Maesters and dragons never did mix. Not since the Citadel in Old Town had orchestrated the demise of the last dragons during the last great Targaryen civil war. Tybalt turned at the sound of the prince's approaching footsteps, jowls a-quiver as he fixed Rhaegar in a most calculating stare. Inwardly, it made Rhaegar nervous. He felt as though he was being sussed out already. My lord, Tybalt bowed stiffly. His chain hung loose about his neck, sagging almost into the snow as he stooped forward. I'm not your lord, Rhaegar replied, equally stiff. I'm plain old Iris Waters. Forgive me, the master replied. I mistook you for one of the old Targaryens. A bastard born and bred, Rhaegar tried to laugh, to make the lie sound light and inconsequential. My father was the Mad King, but he never acknowledged me. My mother was a whore, working in a brothel on the Street of Silk. I was smuggled out of the country before the sack of King's Landing, and now I've returned to take the Black Lord Commander Snow was commended to me by Master Aemon before he passed away. While he spun his hastily made-up story, he wondered whether the maester even halfway believed him, but he rationalized it hardly mattered. It wasn't like anyone would believe him if he wrote to Cersei Lannister, telling her Rhaegar Targaryen was back from the dead and flying dragons around the north. By the sound of things, she had far more pressing concerns to occupy her fractured mind. He found himself wondering what Cersei actually would do if he just walked up to her. I must say, there's no mistaking who your father is, not with that hair and those eyes, the Maester continued. If you forgive my say-so, sire. I'm not a knight, either, Rhaegar pointed out, but not unkindly. But the dragon, Tapald blurted out. You know I must inform the Citadel at once. You'll do no such thing, Rhaegar retorted. Then he drew a deep breath. Look, the Citadel will find out eventually. The whole known world will find out, in good time. But for now, all I ask is that you hold off on informing the Citadel. Tapald shrank back, a red blush creeping up his neck and into his face. It was then that Rosier realized the raven had already flown. He remembered something then, about a friend of Jan's currently at the Citadel. With any luck, he would get the raven and have good sense enough to burn the message and keep the knowledge to himself. Well, never mind, Rhaegar reasoned. By way of compensation, I would know what happened to young Rickon. The name was like a whip cracking against the Maester's arse. He flinched, making his pale flesh wobble under the impact. I don't know. Don't lie to me, Rhaegar cut in, growing angry. As if it's not vile enough that you served such as Ramsay Bolton, you're now too gutless to tell us what happened to the rightful Lord of Winterfell. I am sword to the castle, not the house. Yes, I know what a bloody maester is, Rhaegar's tone grew more waspish. But you didn't know what it was like, Tybalt pointed out, composing himself quickly. You didn't know what he was like. One false move, and it would have been my skin he was peeling off to add to his tapestry. I saw him feed his stepmother and her infant child to those dogs of his. I saw him chase those poor girls through the woods. But Rickon Stark? Rhaegar cut in again. Seeing the residue of the other man's fear, he felt a little ashamed. He had known of Ramsay's worst excesses already. But Rickon had to come before all that. Before all the girls raped and savaged in the woods and the skins hanging from the rafters, like obscene travesties of battle standards. As tragic as their deaths were, they were not the rightful lords of the realm's largest kingdom. A quarrel through the heart, said Tybalt quietly. It was done by the master-at-arms just as the Knights of the Vale entered the field. Ramsay wanted the body thrown over the battlements in a trebuchet aimed at Jon Snow's feet. Then why wasn't it? He asked, feeling utterly deflated. Because Ramsay died before he could get back inside to give the order, Tybalt replied. If Tybalt was attempting to endear himself to the returned Starks, he had a funny way of going about it. Why did you not tell this to Lord Snow and Lady Stark immediately? The man cringed again. I could not find the right time. Not after everything that had happened. Well, listen, said Rhaegar, unwilling to listen to any more. I will break the news to Lord Commander Snow and Lady Stark. You will not breathe a word. Understand? Tybalt nodded, and that was enough confirmation for Rhaegar. He pushed past the maester and entered the broken tower, where Sonar lay snoozing on a bed of fresh straw. Some crossbow quarrels had pierced his scales, and a spear had glanced off his underbelly. Otherwise, he was in fine fettle. Rhaegar knelt at the dragon's side, running his hand carefully down his back. A real, living, fire-breathing dragon. It still felt unreal to him. Only the heat radiating from his body and the smoke curling from his nostrils gave constant confirmation of what Sonyar really was. A living, breathing dragon. Fire made flesh. Sonyar stirred, his tail suddenly lashing against the straw that made his bed. Instinctively, Rhaegar shuffled back. Binding a dragon took more than Valyrian blood, or the Targaryen name. Plenty of his forefathers had died in the attempt, something he became more acutely aware of now that one was in front of him. One born the night Summerhall burned. As he cautiously placed on hand on Sonyar's snout, he found himself wondering whether anything else had been born that night, amidst dark sorcery and wildfire. Sansa's reflection in the mirror was mottled and darkened in the dull glass, further distorted by a crack down the middle that made her look spliced in two. Ramsay's cuts and bruises had gone. They healed long ago, so had the ones dealt by Joffrey's Kingsguard. Looking back, she couldn't even remember who it was that had dealt the blow to her legs, that had brought her to her knees. Adder's Blades? Maren Trant? One of the two. She was 12 years old, stripped and beaten in front of a court full of her enemies, all baying for her blood. The passing of time had taken away the potency of the events, but the memories still lingered. She remembered the fear, the powerlessness, the abandonment. She had shielded herself in her own sense of decorum. Her manners had been her armor, and she went to great pains to give offense to no one. But she had soon learned it wasn't her actions that led to her being abused. It was other people's. Robb won a great victory and took Jaime Lannister prisoner, but it was her who paid the price. It was her that Joffrey was threatening to kill, should Robb ever get too close to the capital. That was what it was to be a piece in someone else's game, and she had been a piece in everyone's game but her own. A frightened little girl. That was Olenna Tyrell's assessment of her, and the memory of overhearing that remark rankled still. Petter protected her, but only because he thought she was pliable and easy to manipulate. And how right he had been. When she remembered and thought on it, she still inwardly recoiled. With her gaze still focused on the mirror, she pinned her new direwolf brooch to her cloak and fixed her outer clothes in place. Her hair was loose about her shoulders, so she quickly pinned the front behind her head, stopping it from falling into her eyes. Satisfied, she left her small chamber, the one she grew up, and made her way down the turnpike stair. The castle was still empty, a shadow of the place she had known as a child. Even so, one or two of the small folk had arrived to offer their services. Most, she knew, still did not dare to believe that the hated Boltons really were gone. Soon, she began to regret burning Ramsay alive. She'd seen the flesh sloughing from his bones herself, but it would have helped reassure everyone if she had had an actual body to parade through the streets of Wintertown. Turin Square and anywhere else the fearful still dwelt. She exited the castle and huddled deeper into her cloak as the white winds blew right through her. But she did not break her step as she approached the godswood. The last time she saw this place was on her wedding night. Time had not eroded the potency of that memory. It still made her insides crawl. Then, just as the memory was set to overwhelm her, her father sprang into the forefront of her mind. Ramsay vanished, replaced by Eddard Stark, who had sat beneath that weirwood for hours at a stretch, sometimes even whole days. She paused, then, watching the spot beneath the ruby boughs, where he would sit with ice across his lap, oilcloth in hand. Every detail returned to her then. The clothes he wore, the way his hair fell in his eyes, and the slow, methodical strokes of the oilcloth against that glimmering blade. She could almost have reached out and touched him. The snow was ankle-deep, now, but she did not care and sat down in her father's old spot. Could he see her now, through the weirwood's face? Like Bran and the three-eyed crow, the crypts had been so badly damaged during Sonyar's escape that the swords had been knocked from the tombs, releasing all the angry, vengeful spirits of the dead Winter Kings. Right now, they had a lot to be angry and vengeful about. Not that she could imagine her father ever being like that. Robb sprang into her mind. Again, he had died far from home, far from their sacred weirwoods and crypts. All she could do was pray to the old gods to find him and bring him to his spiritual home. She closed her eyes to commune with her gods, only to be interrupted minutes later by the sound of approaching footsteps. It was Petter Baelish, and she had the sickening feeling he had been hiding somewhere, waiting for her to appear. "My lady, I hope I'm not disturbing you." Even now, he still managed to sound so pleased with himself. She remained seated. "No, Lord Baelish, you're not disturbing me." She didn't want his company, but she wasn't about to be rude to him either. For what it was worth, he had come through for her with the Knights of the Vale. However, when he approached, he did not sit down. Instead, he loomed over her and looked down his nose. It was enough to make her uncomfortable. So she rose and drew herself to full height. It satisfied her that she was now taller than him. "I used to come here a lot as a child," she remarked, pressing one gloved hand to the pale trunk of the weirwood. "But I never learned to appreciate Winterfell until I had lost it." Baelish was regarding her through narrowed eyes. "And now you have it again. The Starks have it," she corrected gently. "Taking back Winterfell wasn't just about me. It was for Rickon and Bran and Arya." He replied, before moving on to something she had been eating away at him for almost a day now. "Who did you say that man with your brother is?" "I didn't," she pointed out. Sansa knew rightly that Petter wasn't really asking her that question. It was just his way of politely fishing for information. But she was no longer playing by his rules. Realizing she was not for yielding, he grinned disarmingly and looked down at his feet. "Do you mind my asking who that man is?" "Honestly, my lady, he looks familiar." She turned from the tree trunk and met his gaze. "I don't know his full story, but he was about to take the black when Jon was stabbed." "But the hair and the eyes and the dragon," he cut in impertinently. Sansa continued to act dumb, an act made all the easier by the fact that they all had her down as really being quite dumb. She gave a shrug. "Truly, my lord, I am as curious as you are. Who do you think he is?" I hesitated before answering. "A rare breed not seen much around these parts of late. A Targaryen." She feigned surprise. "The last Targaryens fled across the narrow sea, and House Velaryon have those looks." "Why, I saw the bastard of Driftmark myself, and he looked the same." "But with green eyes," Peyer retorted. "And no eyes when the queen catches up with him after he stole all the boats she paid for." Curiosity piqued, Sansa's head cocked in interest. "Cersei's boats. After you, vacated the royal courts, Cersei ordered Dromons be built and appointed Orny Waters to build them and command the fleet. He did his bid, took Cersei's gold, appointed his friends in all key command posts, then promptly sailed off into the sunset. House Velaryon were another of the Targaryen loyalists," she remembered. "If Arya Waters was still in the area, patrolling the seas, he could come in useful for Rhaegar and Daenerys." While she was thinking it over, Peter moved closer to her. He only stopped when he was within kissing distance, making her step back, only to be blocked by the tree. Momentarily caught off guard, she tried to think what to do next. But before she could do anything, Peter suddenly broke away as Jon stepped into the clearing. Directly behind him, Rhaegar kept a respectful distance, and Lady Mormont soon came as well. The look Jon gave Peter could have curdled milk. "My lord of Harrenhal," he said curtly, "I would speak with my sister alone if it please you." It didn't please him. "The lady and I have no secrets." While they eyed each other suspiciously, Sansa's nerves twitched, an ominous feeling in her belly. "What's happened?" she asked Jon. "It's Rickon," he said, somberly. Rhaegar avoided looking at her, while Peter's expression suddenly sharpened. She sometimes wondered whether he could smell bad news that was to his advantage. "Pere, go," she said, flatly. Rhaegar stepped aside to let him pass, then no one said anything until he was gone from sight and earshot. All the while, Sansa remained where she was beneath the boughs of the weirwood tree. Full of apprehension, she did not know whether to approach the other three or not. Torn between the two options, she watched, dumbfounded. When they knelt in a show of fealty to her, she knew what it meant. Then, she knew why they had come, and she had to swallow her grief and steady her racing nerves. The funeral procession was only small. 7 people, one for each year of her brother's short life. Sansa herself led the way, accompanied by Jon and Rhaegar, Sarah Davos Seaworth, Lord Royce, Maester Tybalt and Lyanna Mormont made the 7 and followed behind. Each cradled a candle as they made their way into the crypts, shrouded in mourning blacks. Silently they made their way past the Winter Kings, those whose tombs had been damaged by the escaping dragon. In time, Sansa would put them back together again. But for now, she had come only to mourn her brother. Rickon's painfully small casket was there already. The sight of it made the breath catch in her throat all over again. The flesh had been boiled from his bones already, and what was left of him was neatly arranged inside the box, awaiting burial. Unlike the faith of the 7, theirs was a simple ceremony. They had no septons or septas, nor holy men to speak some ancient rite. It was just them and their dead, alone with their private grief. They reached the spot where Brandon, Lyanna, and Rickard Stark were all grouped together. Sansa had already replaced her uncle's sword, but Lyanna's statue had been smashed by the dragon, and Lord Rickard had lost his stone head. The Boltons had not seen fit to provide her father with an effigy at all, although that hardly surprised her. It was one more thing she would rectify herself. Meanwhile, she watched with a growing numbness as Rickon's casket was drawn into the gaping hole at their father's side. It was all over in an instant, and suddenly, people were murmuring words of condolence in her and Jon's ears. She barely heard them as she continued to watch the spot where Rickon's remains had been consumed by the dark granite. She placed her flickering candle down at the foot of the crypt, the others soon following suit, to create a pool of soft light that bathed the stones in pale warmth. It made the stone faces come alive, except for Rickon and Lyanna. Lyanna's tomb really had been reduced to rubble, and her effigy was little more than misshapen rock. Jon noticed it too, and stiffened at her side. She was about to mutter some apology when the glinting of gold among the smashed rocks caught her eye. It glimmered briefly as it caught the light of the candles before winking out. She pointed it out to Jon before another voice cut over her own. "My lady, I wondered if I might have a private audience." Jolted out of her curiosity, Sansa turned to find Lord Royce holding up a lantern. "I would not normally ask at such a time, but this is important." Sansa nodded. "Of course, my lord." She owed the man a great debt for bringing the Vale to her side, so wasn't about to deny him anything. He had been kind to her at the Vale, and she remembered him well from a visit to Winterfell, as he escorted his son to Castle Black. As she allowed him to escort her back into the open air, she caught sight of the practice yard where Lord Royce had once beaten her poor father into the dirt, almost smiling at the memory. It seemed an age ago now, but could only have been 3 years. 4 at the most. Now in the light of day, he looked older and grayer than she remembered. "I wish to speak with you anyway, my lord," she began. "To thank you for bringing your men to my cause." "Nothing of it, my lady," he assured her. "But it is a related matter on which I wish to speak with you." Curious, she frowned. "Go on." He hesitated before continuing, as if gathering his thoughts. "My lady, certain people have been speaking such slanders against my good name that I would greatly appreciate an opportunity to explain directly to you." They reached the old practice yard, which was empty and silent now, and she stopped to face him. She was mystified as to what he could mean, but he looked pale with worry and wished to reassure him. "No one has said anything to me, my lord, but if you would care to explain, I will do what I can to help you." "It is true that I knew of Baelish's plan to transport you to the Fingers," he stated. "But there is no truth at all to Baelish's accusations that it was I who sold those plans to the Boltons. I can only pray that your ladyship believes me when I tell you I did not betray you to Rose Bolton. I cannot say who did or who arranged that ambush that ended with you being forced into marriage with that unspeakable monster. If I did, I would lay their treacherous heads at your feet." The Fingers, ambush, all of this was new to Sansa, but she wanted to know exactly what tales Baelish had spun this poor man. So, she quickly schooled her expression and hid her ignorance behind a soft smile that reassured him that she bore him no ill will at all. "What exactly did Petter tell you about the ambush?" "Only that not long after you left the Vale you were set upon by Northmen, then dragged back to Winterfell and married against your will. Petter said there was nothing he could have done to prevent it." "Oh, did he now?" she replied. The only thing that really surprised her was that Petter had told a lie that would be so easily exposed. She almost could not believe he had been so lax. "Did he really tell you that?" Royce frowned, uncomprehendingly. "He did, and he is blaming me. All I wish to do is assure you that House Royce stands shoulder to shoulder with House Stark, as it always has done. We were livid when Lysaron refused to join the war on your brother's side. Absolutely livid. It is my wish that our coming to your aid now will not only avenge the murder of your father, but go some way to restoring the honor lost to us by standing idly by as King Robb fought the Lannisters. Had we been there, then that wedding..." Sansa could guess at what Lord Royce could not bring himself to say. The Red Wedding would not have happened had the Vale been at their sides. The only reason Lysa refused to join the fray was because Petter had instructed her not to. She had been enslaved to him, and thousands had died. A feeling of cold loathing washed through her at the thought of Petter Baelish now. "My lord, I know for a fact you did not betray me to the Boltons, nor arrange any ambush," she assured him. He sagged with relief. "You do?" "There was no ambush. He sold me to the Boltons of his own free choice," she pointed out, coldly. "I beg of you to take no action yet, my lord. There is much and more I would learn of Lord Pedier's actions, not only now but in the past. For the time being, I believe we need him alive." Royce was speechless for a long moment, his gray eyes turned hard as granite, his cheeks flushing red with suppressed fury. One gauntleted hand had already reached for the pommel of his sword, and Sansa knew he would strike Petter's head from his neck right now, but for her appeal. "A man like that does not deserve to live." "I know," she cut in. "His life is already forfeit. He just doesn't know it yet. But there's more that he's done that neither of us yet know about. I would know the full truth before I sentence him to die. I beg you, my lord, to do the same." A standoff developed during which neither of them spoke. Eventually, Royce himself broke the silence. "I would have him closely followed to make sure he does not escape. I will not have him alone with Lord Robert, either." That was wise, she agreed. Of course. I will see to it that he does not leave Winterfell again. I will gladly put you in charge of watching him. If he tries to escape, you have my leave to strike him down where he stands. That appeased the lord, and he nodded his head. Your father would have done likewise, my lady, so you have my backing. Sansa flushed with pride at the compliment. You're very kind to say so, my lord, and I thank you. You spoke also of the past, he added. Can I be so bold as to ask what was meant by that? She thought for a moment, trying to think how she would explain all she knew. It's a long story, one best told by a warm hearth with a warm drink. Royce raised a smile, gesturing toward the doors of the castle. Then, by all means, let us repair indoors. Rosier nodded to Lady Sansa and Lord Royce as he passed them in the yard, but did not stop to speak. He was struggling to maintain his grip on a shovel, mortar mix, and a pick, wrapped in a heavy blanket. Once he had hauled his load over to the crypts, he nudged the door open with his back and carefully navigated the turnpike stair to descend into the stone-vaulted cavern safely. Jon met him halfway, where he gratefully unburdened himself. Is that everything we need? He asked, peering over his son's shoulder at Lyanna's wrecked tomb. It is, thank you, replied Jon, turning away from him. When Rhaegar made to follow him, he added, You can return to whatever it was you were doing now. He stopped abruptly, pulling up at the curtness in Jon's tone. Don't you need me to help? You have already, Jon replied, nodding to the tools now in his arms. I'll see you at supper. But I want to help, he tried to say, but the words seemed to get lost somewhere in his throat. Meanwhile, Jon had already made his way back into the crypts. Rhaegar could hear the pick and shovel clanging together, sonorously as he ambled away. Understanding himself to be dismissed, he turned slowly and headed for the door again. There was little to be gained by staying somewhere he clearly wasn't wanted. Outside again, breathing in the biting northern air, he found himself with nowhere to go and no one to see. No one knew him, and if he told them, they would never believe him. Never in his life had he been in such a predicament. As a prince of the blood royal, his life had always been structured around duty, ceremony, and the functioning of state. Every minute of every day had been accounted for, and free time was a luxury to be spent wisely. Now he had nothing but spare time, and he felt like a spare part, superfluous to the running of so much as a piss-up in a brewery. Only Sonar the dragon needed him, and he was sleeping at that moment. Dejectedly, he made his way to the Great Hall, only to find the hall occupied by Lady Sansa, deep in conversation with Lord Royce. Picking up on the sensitivity of their conversation, he apologized hastily for his intrusion and backed away quickly. He ducked down a passageway upon hearing Padir Baelish and Maester Tybalt approaching, issuing commands to the Stark's new servants and making arrangements for the arrival of the Northern Lords. Some were less than a day's ride away, but Rhaegar knew he personally had nothing to get excited about. Once they arrived, he would be confined to his chambers for anonymity's sake. Eventually, it was to his chambers he found himself drifting toward. Winterfell's library had burned down some years ago, so not even a book could offer him solace, as he lay back on his feather bed and looked at the direwolf carved into his bed frame. It seemed once the shock had worn off, his arrival in the future had lost its sheen, and he found himself struggling to remember what the point was. Surely, it was not just to help his son win back Winterfell. The real war was supposed to be happening north of the Wall, or so he had been told. Sinking into a torpor, he closed his eyes and willed himself to sleep. When sleep eluded him, he found himself thinking of Dragonstone. Davos told him it had been left undefended since the usurper's brother left, and that Queen Cersei had failed to take it back since the captain of her fleet stole all her new ships and disappeared with them. He could just walk back in there, then yield the castle to his sister. The sister he didn't know at all, but couldn't be any worse than the son he didn't know. Unless he really was a prisoner in this place, and there was only one way to discover the truth of that matter. The chest was larger than Jon imagined. He tried extracting it from Lyanna's tomb with just his bare hands. But when it would not budge, he sent Ragged for the pick and shovel. Now he had spent an hour working around its edges, carefully excavating whatever it was from beneath the place where her statue once stood. Made from solid oak and banded in iron, it weighed more than a horse to boot. After an hour, he cleared the rusting padlock. Another hour of slow, methodical work, and he finally reached the bottom of the chest. His hands were filthy, and his fingers bleeding, where they snagged against rocks and loose rubble. By the time he was done, however, he was numb to the pain. Bent double, with his arms wrapped around the chest, He heaved and hauled it out of the ground, with every ounce of what was left of his strength. Once it was out, and he was able to shine a lantern into the hole in the ground, all he could see was the casket containing her bones, which had been positioned right next to the mystery trunk Sansa had spotted. There would only be old, dry bones in there, though. He remembered Lyanna again, the laughing, dancing girl he knew at Harrenhal, and the sight of her remains made his heart ache all over again. Pain and guilt mingling together, on top of a longing for that which could never be. "It was you I wanted to bring back, not him," Jon confessed to what was left of her, in that box in the ground. "It was a mother I needed, not a second father. Now I have him, and I don't know what to do with him." It was nothing personal. Rhaegar was a good man, and it was some small consolation to know he was not begotten by rape. He was even happy that the prince's honor could be restored, and he would not be remembered as a rapist. He even understood that Rhaegar had been brought back to fulfill a purpose that had nothing to do with Jon needing to know his real parents. No gods that he ever learned about had been all that family-minded. All it had been was an aside that led back to the prophecy and little more. But none of that dulled the pain of knowing he could do nothing to save his mother. After he had caught his breath, he kicked over the pile of dirt and rubble to fill in his mother's grave again. Then found himself alone with a locked box. He spent a moment fumbling with the locked padlock, and quickly realized that hacking it off with the pick would be much easier than searching the castle for any key that might fit it. So he did just that. One well-placed, forceful blow later, and it lay at his feet in 2 bits. The impact of the pick against the metal lock reverberated through the crypts, making him feel uneasy. A feeling that intensified as he lifted the lid to reveal what was inside. The creaking lid opened onto darkness at first. Jon reached for the lantern, letting the light fill the inside of the crate, revealing a large and heavy object wrapped in black and red velvet. More curious than anything, he pulled the object upwards, causing the velvet shroud to fall away. In his hands, he was left with a large silver harp. It was the same one he had seen his father playing at Harrenhal, and Jon found himself staring at it in wonder. Why was the first question that sprang into his mind? Why would such an item be buried deep below Winterfell? It was beautiful, to be sure, and his father would be beyond happy to be reunited with it. But why did Uncle Eddard not only keep it, but bury it? Years underground had degraded the fine silver strings, but the large, ornate frame had not tarnished. It shone and shimmered hypnotically in the flickering light of the candles and lantern. Jon walked around the instrument slowly, looking it up and down intently. The velvet cloth it was wrapped in muffled his footfalls, but it was just an old Targaryen battle standard. After a moment, Jon collected it from the ground and shook it out. The red bits he'd seen were just the 3-headed dragon. It was frayed at the edges, and one of the tears marked a spot where it had been pierced by an arrow. Eddard must have taken it from the battlefield itself. But why? Jon found himself wondering again. Lost in his thoughts, it took him several long minutes to realize the crate hadn't yet given up all its secrets. There were still 1 or 2 items inside, things that had been hidden by the bulk of the harp. One was a Targaryen wedding cloak, which he remembered Lyanna showing to him not long after her wedding to Rhaegar. The final item was a necklace and locket, a direwolf embossed on side and a dragon on the other. There were no miniatures inside, just a lock of baby hair and a small roll of parchment that had grown black with mold, obscuring what was once written there. More than a little disappointed by the degraded parchment, he closed the locket and placed it back in the crate. Before he could do anything else, the sound of the door opening above, soon followed by approaching footsteps, pulled him up sharp. He swung the lantern around to get a look at who it was, breathing a sigh of relief when only Rhaegar rounded the turnpike stair and met his gaze. He stopped abruptly, looking from Jon to the harp and back again. Without saying anything, he approached slowly as if the harp were an animal that might suddenly bolt from him. "Where did you find her?" he asked Jon. "I thought the usurper would have had her melted down for scrap as soon as I was burned." Jon noted the use of feminine pronouns. "She was buried alongside my mother. Lord Stark must have saved it, or arranged for it to be saved. I don't suppose you know why it's here." Rhaegar was still studying the harp. He ventured as far as plucking one of the strings, then flinched back as it twanged discordantly and promptly snapped. The recoil lashed the back of his hand, drawing a fine trickle of blood the width of a single hair. "Your mother must have asked him to save it," replied Rhaegar, sucking the blood off the back of his hand. "Other than that, I have no notion." His gaze switched to where Luciana's tomb once stood, and Jon could hear the breath hitch in his throat. His eyes misting over as he approached the spot. One foot nudged at the recently disturbed ground, rifling through the loose rubble. He soon stopped and looked over his shoulder. "I really would like to help, Jon," he said. "I loved her too." "I know," replied Jon curtly. Rosier looked as if he was about to say something else, before seemingly changing his mind and reaching for the mortar mix. This time, Jon did not try to stop him. He reached for the parts of Lyanna's statue that he had managed to salvage and began sorting them into size, then piling them into which bits were meant to go where. Together, they would piece her back together. "I know I'm not the one you wanted," Rhaegar said, after a while. Jon was about to protest, before realizing it was pointless. "This isn't about what I want. Then why do I feel so apologetic all the time?" "I don't know what you mean," said Jon, turning to face his father again. Rhaegar paused before explaining. "I constantly feel like I should be apologizing for not being Lyanna, for not being Eddard Stark. Don't you think I feel the same about not being Rhaenys or Aegon?" Jon retorted. "You never meant for me to be your heir, did you? The prince that was promised." "And don't you think I'm just grateful that one of my children has lived?" the other answered. "This is hard for us both, Jon. I have a son who is almost the same age as me. In fact, I don't even know how old I'm supposed to be. Feelings are a little conflicted for us both, right now." Jon did not reply immediately. He fixed a piece of Lyanna's statue in place, letting Rhaegar mortar it before letting it hold. "I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I knew how to make sense of this." "You and I both," Rhaegar concurred. They lapsed into silence as they continued to work at Lyanna's effigy. But Jon dwelled on how he had been with Rhaegar since he returned. There had been a distance between them, not helped by the problems they had faced and the battles they had fought together. The distance yawned into a chasm, and they were no longer even touching from a distance. "Am I a prisoner here?" Rhaegar eventually asked. "Of course not," Jon assured him. "Why would you even think that?" "You can't deny you've been keeping me out of the way," he explained. "When the Northern Lords arrive, most of whom I never met in my life, I'm going to be confined in my chambers. You said it yourself, if I am not a prisoner, then I am free to leave, am I not?" Jon sighed heavily. "Where would you go?" "Dragonstone," he answered quickly. "There's no one there, and I can yield the castle to Daenerys. If she ever gets here—" "I think you should stay here until we find out where she is," said Jon. "It's just common sense, and in any case, if you're only doing this because you think I don't want you here, then you're wrong." Rhaegar almost dropped the piece of statue he was holding, but caught it in time. "Are you saying you do want me here?" "Of course I want you here," Jon replied. It was only when Rhaegar said it that Jon realized he did want him around. He certainly didn't want him to go wandering off across Westeros in hope of just bumping into his sister. Whatever they did next, they needed to do it together. Like rebuilding stone effigies. Lyanna was slowly taking shape again, reforming from the rubble that the rampaging dragon had left in his wake. Jon felt quite proud of it and stood back to admire the effect. It was then that he cast his mind back to when he first set foot through the gates of Winterfell. After the recent battle, "I thought I saw her, you know," he told Rhaegar. "When we breached the walls and took back the castle, I looked up at the windows in the south tower, and I thought I saw her there in the upper window." He thought he saw her smiling, her hand raised in a sad gesture of farewell as she retreated from the window. Just for an instant, before she was gone again, looking back now, he couldn't say for sure what he saw. "Maybe you did see her," Rhaegar posited. "I can't imagine Lyanna wanting to miss out on a fight like that." Jon laughed. "Nor I." He paused and thought on it a little more. Maybe it was her, or maybe it was just a trick of the light. Either way, she has to be at peace now. She has her home back. Silence, again, in which they both studied the hastily repaired statue. The cracks still showed, but it was a good enough likeness until the proper stone mason could be called in. Meanwhile, they both needed food and a place to talk properly. "Come with me," said Jon. "We need to talk." In defiance of winter's onslaught, the north was all blue skies, and crisp winds when Sansa opened the shutters of Winterfell's great hall. Sadly, she knew she would see little of it as she turned the high table. Maester Tybalt was already there, his hands folded inside his deep, dagged sleeves, resting on the old weirwood trestle. The expression on his face was ponderous, quickly softening as he noticed her watching him. After drawing a deep breath, he began reeling off a list of all they had accomplished since taking back Winterfell, and all they had yet to do. She knew most of it, but listened intently anyway. The kitchens were fully staffed once more, and the servants were almost at full capacity. They had a new stable hand to replace Hodor and the steward in charge of the new household. It was a relation of Vianpole who had served the late Lord Stark well. Sansa was satisfied, taking her seat at the head of the table with a smile on her face. A smile that became decidedly fixed as the doors opened, revealing Pater Baelish. At the sight of the Lord of Harrenhal, Tybalt fell into a dark silence. "Shall I afford my lady some privacy?" "I would rather you stay," she answered, honestly. She could not face being alone with Peter so soon after his lies had been exposed. Potter looked put out, almost hurt. "If my lady remembers, we have important matters to discuss." "But, my lord, Maester Tybalt is my maester," she pointed out, sweetly. "Whatever matters we have, it is vital he is fully informed of it." A flicker of a smile crossed Tybalt's face, which he hid by bowing his head over a sheet of parchment. Meanwhile, Petyr hid his discomfiture well. He deeply disliked no longer being her only confidant and counselor. She could see the distrust in his eyes as his gaze darted from her to the maester. "Sworn to the Boltons, if I remember rightly," he remarked dryly. Tybalt drew a sharp breath at the mention of his old lord. Sansa was unconcerned. "Sworn to the Dreadfort," she corrected Petyr pointedly. "Empty castles have small need of maesters, my lord. So why shouldn't I seek his wise counsel?" "My lady is gracious," Tybalt murmured. Sansa rewarded him with a smile, and finally, Pater came meekly. He joined them at the table and spread some papers out in front of him. She didn't much care what they were, but she made a mental note that he had already tried to bring down 2 members of her new household already, but it was still too soon to act against him. "Actually, Lord Batesley, you are just in time," she informed him as he settled down. "Lord Royce is due any moment, and I know you two work closely together." "Really?" he replied. "What a treat." His facetious tone was not lost on her. Sansa pretended to be oblivious to it and continued her conversation about filling the household appointments, addressing Maester Tybalt. The castle had guards already, men who had helped them reclaim Winterfell, excluded from the main conversation. Pater was reduced to occasionally making a point of clearing his throat, but Sansa would not be hurried. "Not all posts need to be filled today, my lady," Tybalt assured her. "For now, we have enough to cope with the visitors from Deepwood Motte and White Harbor. We have servants and food enough to satisfy all, even with the oncoming winter." It was the duller part of bringing Winterfell back to life, but Sansa still relished it. She wouldn't have entrusted any of it to anyone else for anything. It was her chance to avenge her family by not only restoring Eddard Stark's legacy, but building on it. She knew her gender meant she would have to work twice as hard to win the trust of her lords, but she relished that challenge too, and she had a feeling she knew how to get off to a good start. Once it was over, she dismissed Master Tybalt with a smile. "Ensure all is in order, if you will." Tybalt's eye glimmered in the broad morning light. "As my lady commands." Peter's interest suddenly looked piqued again. Leaning back in his chair with one hand lazily toying with his goatee, he watched sharp-eyed as the maester left. "Ensure what is in order?" he asked. "You will see in good time, my lord," she assured him. "Now, what is it you wish to discuss with me in private?" "Lord Royce," he answered. "I have concerns about him and certain tales. He may be telling—" "I'm sure I have no idea of what you are speaking," she cut in. She knew he meant the lies he'd spun Lord Royce about her being abducted by Rose Bolton's men. She also knew that that wasn't the only abduction he had lied about in his life. Jon was down in the crypts now, trying to mend poor Lyanna's tomb as they spoke. "Still, my lady, it seems Lord Royce has had a better offer as he isn't here, as you thought he would be," Petyr observed, glancing around the room as though the Vale Lord might be hiding behind a tapestry. Sansa had never seen him so skittish before. "He will be here," she stated. "I had him send his men out to greet the Manderleys and Glovers on the road, to escort them back to Winterfell." Petyr frowned. "You had him send his men away?" "They'll be back soon," she laughed. "Anyway, Tybalt is sending him in now." In the meantime, they lapsed into silence that wasn't completely uncomfortable. Sansa affixed her direwolf seal to various formal appointment notices, ready to be dispatched to the relevant people. She hoped they would enjoy their new jobs. Meanwhile, Petyr was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "You seemed distant earlier. Have I done something to displease you?" Preferring to let him sweat, Sansa did not reply. During the silence, she could hear Jon's voice calling from outside. Without thinking, her head snapped towards the window. but she could not see him. Even so, she felt a little happier just knowing he was close by. Before much longer, her new steward appeared at the door and announced the arrival of Lord Royce. Finally, Petter sighed. Ignoring him, Sansa answered properly, "Show him in, please." Snowflakes were melting in the older man's iron-gray hair when he stepped inside, his clothes disheveled from riding. He bowed respectfully, a mark of deference she acknowledged with a polite nod. "Forgive my lateness, my lady, but I met your sworn sword not far from the castle," he explained. "Lady Brienne?" she asked, feeling hopeful. She had begun to worry about Brienne. "Aye, my lady," Royce replied. "And she is not alone." That stood to reason. Pod would be with her. Sansa thought little of it, but made a note to go out and meet Brienne as soon as she arrived. She had missed the big woman, felt almost vulnerable without her. "Also, my lady, my scouts inform me that Lords Glover, Manderley, and Flint are all approaching. The farthest only 5 miles away," he said. "There are others, Foresters and Mollins have also been seen." That was more than she expected, and she felt her nerves twist. Had they come to show fealty or lay siege to the castle? She didn't know what to expect, but now was not the time to worry about it. "Thank you, my lord," she answered, her tone clipped. "There is one other matter we wish to discuss with you." Royce's gaze went from Sansa to Baelish. "If it please you, my lady, Lord Barris has informed me that you were fully informed of the plans he and I made to leave the Eyrie and head for the Fingers," she tersely explained, "that there was only one person who could have betrayed me." "My lady, please hear me out," Royce cut in, his gray eyes widening in panic. "I knew the plans. I told you I knew the plans." "So who else could have betrayed me?" she demanded. At the periphery of her vision, she could see Peter looking stunned. He looked like a boar staring down the shaft of a hunter's quarrel, but swiftly recovered himself. "Only the intervention of Lord Arryn saved you last time," said Baelish. "But you're on Lady Stark's lands now." "Guards!" Sansa called out shrilly. "Guards, seize him!" In the split second it took for the guards to arrive and surround Lord Royce, Sansa's heartbeat had raced to thrice its normal speed, and her palms were slick with sweat. Royce's protests were drowned out as he was swiftly surrounded, and she gulped hard as he was dragged, protesting vehemently out of the side door. The silence Lord Royce left in his wake was deafening. All Sansa could hear was the rush of blood now pounding through her head. She couldn't remember leaping to her feet, but she was standing now and gripping the edge of the weirwood table, her knuckles turning white as she faced Baelish. He looked like he barely knew what was going on, and she had him. In that moment, she knew she had him. Baelish looked at her as though he were weighing her up by the ounce. She realized he was speechless, and she had never seen him speechless before. He gestured toward the door behind which Royce had been dragged away. "What was that?" he asked, eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You told me that story you told him about the ambush," she informed him. "So, like when you pushed Lysa through the moon door, I just went along with it. Like Lysa, I thought you wanted him out of your way. I thought this is what you wanted." Sansa paused, wide-eyed and suddenly tremulous as if full of self-doubt. It worked, and Pettier was soon holding her in a tight embrace. A second later, and he planted a whiskery kiss on the lips. A kiss interrupted, as Jon came barreling through the doors. "What was all that about?" "Oh," he blurted out, pulling up short at the sight of them. He flushed a deep red, and Sansa was suddenly thoroughly embarrassed. "Brother, wait outside, please, and I will explain everything," she said roughly, pushing Peter back into his seat. It was too late. Jon had seen the kiss, and his hand was resting on the pommel of Longclaw. Although clearly furious, he backed away and left them alone. Once he was gone, Puther sighed in relief. After a long and heavy pause, Sansa collapsed back into her seat. Her breathing was still ragged, her heart still racing. Trying to compose herself, she drew a steadying breath. Now she had to prepare for the next stage of the plan. But she needed to give the others more time to get in place. For now, she bided her time with small talk. "Now that I have done this thing for you, I need your absolute trust," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "I kept your secret about Lysa, and now I have done this. Now I have the North, and you have the Vale. And Harrenhal, of course. Together we rule more than half of this realm, and Cersei Lannister doesn't even know it yet." "Of course you have my trust," Peter gasped, as though she should never have doubted it. "Ask of me anything, and you know it will be yours." Sansa didn't need to consider that for long. "I need the truth from you. I need the whole truth about this war, and the last. I want to know about the letter you sent. My mother the night before she married my father, and what it was that made Brandon think my Aunt Lyanna had been abducted. And I know you know, I have it on good authority. But I never... He began, but Sansa cut him off. If you don't tell me everything, I will release Lord Royce and tell him the truth about Lysa. Then he can do with you what he will. Cutter dear was cornered and the smile froze on his face. And if I tell you... She got up and walked over to a vacant chair at the end of the table. On the seat was a battered old cloak of white and gray. It was folded in such a way that only half a dire wolf snarled out from the fabric, baring its jagged silk teeth. Carefully, she placed it in Petter's hands. For a long minute, all he seemed to do was study the wedding cloak intently. After what seemed to her an eternity, he slowly lifted his gaze to meet her own. Are you being serious? He stammered, as if asking might run the risk of her changing her mind. When I arrived this morning, I thought you were still angry with me, that you were going to send me away. Instead, you make me the happiest man in Westeros. Sansa lowered her gaze, eyelids dipping kylie. Once, when my mother was in her cups after Bran's fall, I overheard her saying she regretted not marrying you when she had the chance. I never want to make the same mistakes as her, and the chance we have now will never come again. The chance to change everything and make this realm our own. Petyr put down the cloak and got to his feet, gently raising her as went. One hand slowly raked through her hair, toying the auburn tresses delicately. His breathing had become labored as he spoke. I will give you everything. But I meant what I said, she stated firmly. If we are to be wed, I must know everything. Otherwise, how can we work together? I have taken a huge risk by imprisoning Lord Royce, and now I need you to play your part. You don't need to tell me that, he assured her, and I will tell you. Tell me where and when, and I will be there. We must act fast. Be at the godswood an hour before sundown, she instructed. But what about the septon? And I have no cloak to give you, he blustered, sounding panicked. Sansa could tell he was unwilling to let this opportunity pass, and little wrinkles were getting to him. She almost laughed. We follow the old gods, remember. We don't have septons here, or any other holy men. It's just you, me, and our witnesses. The northern lords are on their way, and they will be happy to bear witness. Jon is my closest kin, and can stand for my father. As for the cloak, don't worry about it. That's just some detail we included to keep the faith happy. Petyr laughed too, relief causing him to sag. Forgive, my love. Your northern gods are still foreign to me. I will learn. I promise you. Without further ado, Sansa leaned over and kissed his cheek. I have a wedding to prepare for. You must excuse me. Only reluctantly did Petyr let go of her hand. An hour before sundown, he reminded her. The dragon was healing well. Now that he was out of the crypts and able to breathe the open air, his eyes shone brighter and his scales gleamed in the sun. His wounds, sustained during the battle for Winterfell, were closed and vanishing fast. Jon sat back and watched his father slowly win the beast's trust. Will you be able to fly him again? He asked. He knew some dragon lore, but not nearly as much as Rhaegar did. Rhaegar seemed unfazed. Of course. He'll mend as right as a hatchling, in time. The deposed prince was kneeling in the fresh straw in the broken tower, nursing Sonar back to health. As for the dragon, he was dozing again. His heavy breaths sent up showers of dust and loose straw from the ground. When he was awake, the beating of his wings was like a hurricane, and he was beautiful. Whenever Jon imagined dragons, he imagined ugly, scaly creatures. But Sonar was all blues and silvers, swirling patterns from his smoking snout to the tip of his tail. The more time he spent in their company, the more he felt at one with them, as though he belonged with them. Being with them soothed him, even in times as trying as those he found himself in at that moment. As if reading his thoughts, Rhaegar put down the poultice he had pressed into Sonar's wing and regarded Jon thoughtfully. Are you feeling better now? Some, he replied. For what it's worth, I think Saints well knows how to handle the likes of Petyr Baelish. Rhaegar added, trying to sound comforting. As for Lord Royce, what if he did play a role in selling her off to the Boltons? I find it hard to believe that a man of Baelish's low birth has somehow inveigled his way into the highest echelons of Westerosi power. Jon huffed indignantly, because he's clever and devious, for cleverer and far more devious than anyone realizes. And he thought to himself, many powerful lords allowed themselves to be duped by Baelish's low birth, a lethal underestimation he uses to his own advantage. Before they could discuss the matter any further, however, the horn sounded. Startled, Jon leapt to his feet and brushed the dust and loose straw from his clothes. Rhaegar did likewise, before thinking twice. "If that's the northern lords arriving, I need to stay out of sight," he said. "Some may remember me." Jon nodded. "Stay here, and I'll tell you when it's safe to come out." With that, he left. He made his way quickly through the inner yard, passing the main keep that obstructed the broken tower, and out into the main courtyard. Already their new armor had the forge reopened and was busy at work. It still felt strange, almost painful, to look in there and not see Rickon toiling away. Once he made it to the front gates, he pulled up at the side of the carriage that was now stationary just inside the walls. A few bedraggled-looking men had surrounded it, their halberds and pikes spotted with rust. More than one of them bore the trout standards of House Tully. Leading them was Lady Brienne of Tarth and her trusty squire Podrick Payne. Although relieved to see her, the sight of the Tully banners made his hackles rise. "My lady, it's good to have you back," he greeted her while helping her dismount. "It's good to be back," she replied, her sentiment showing in her face. "Congratulations on taking back Winterfell. How I wish I had been here to fight, beneath Lady Sansa's banners." Jon had a sinking feeling that there would be plenty more opportunities for Brienne to fight beneath the direwolf of House Stark. For now, he left his ominous feelings buried within himself. "I see you've brought some men for our cause." They were led by a much older man, all iron-gray hair and bright blue eyes, was staring up at the battlements in wonder, smiling at the Stark banners now hanging from the battlements. "Tully men who escaped when the castle fell," Brienne explained. "Many of them evaded certain death by swimming beneath the portcullis and up the river." Jon had only heard descriptions of River Run and, as such, couldn't really imagine an underwater portcullis. However, he did not mind Tully men flocking to their cause. Not all of them were like Catelyn, he knew, and if they came all this way, then they must not all hate him. Besides, there were other matters Brienne needed to know about. "My lady, there's something urgent I need you to know about," he said, trying to lead her away. "It's about Sansa and Baelish. There's something happening, and I think he's in for a—" "My lady," the old man cut over them. "Aren't you going to introduce us?" Brienne looked apologetic, but remained silent as the man approached. Jon caught sight of a black onyx brooch glittering on the front of his tunic, a black fish. Inwardly he groaned as he realized who the man was. No doubt Catelyn Stark had told her uncle all about what a deceitful bastard he was. Poor Brienne blushed to the roots of her hair. "Sir Brynden, this is Jon," she began, before faltering. "Our Jon Snow," Brynden finished for her tersely. "I know who he is, by reputation at least. Last we heard, you were executed for letting wilding hosts through the wall. I'd be surprised to see you back on your feet now. But these are strange times we live in, bastard." "Bastard or no, I'm the reason House Stark has their castle back," Jon pointed out. "In this castle, you are my sister's guest. As such, you'll treat us both with respect." He was no longer a frightened child, and the Tullys were neither Starks nor Northmen. He intended to remind them of that. Meanwhile, Brienne had positioned herself between them. Not that she needed to, as Reimagined took his horse by the reins and followed Pod away from the scene. As they went, Jon watched the stationary carriage once more. Reimagined was on horseback, the men all on foot. He soon found himself wondering what was in there. "There's something else you need to know," said Brienne, nodding to the carriage. "In there." Knowing what few Tullys had escaped, Jon knew there would be no supplies in there. He wondered how they even managed to get the carriage in the first place. His growing apprehension was not helped by Brienne becoming all pale and clammy as she led him over. "Brace yourself for this, Lord Commander," said Brienne, slowly opening the door of the carriage. Jon looked inside, unable to see anything at first. His eyes quickly adjusted to the poor light inside. Then he saw and recoiled in shock before he even knew what it was he was seeing. Something was happening, but Sansa had no time to find out what it was. She barely had time to greet Brienne and instruct her to keep Sir Brynden out of Jon's way and pet hers. Sadly, she was too late for poor Jon. "Once this is done," she assured Brienne, "I will come and see Uncle Brynden, but I must do this first." If Brienne had made it back even a day earlier, she could have been brought in on the plan. But it was all too late, and there was no time to explain. Even Jon hadn't been fully informed, and he'd been there the whole time. Instead, she hurried a bath and hurried into a dress, while her new handmaids brushed her hair to a fine copper shine. While the brushing continued, she neatly folded a fresh document and affixed her seal. "Is that your marriage certificate, my lady?" the handmaid asked, giggling. Sansa forced a smile and tucked it down her bodice. Something like that. As for the dress, it was the same one she had worn to marry Ramsay, a large and fussy confection of white damask and cream samite. The tears Ramsay made had been mended by her own hand and were barely visible. Besides, Patir had never seen it before, and when she met him in the godswood at the appointed hour, she heard the breath catch in his throat at the sight of her. He greeted her with a brief kiss, from which he pulled back to look at her again, those laughing gray-green eyes raking the length of her body. Now she had an hour to get the truth out of him. "My lord," she said, holding up one arm, "let us begin." Servants had already lit the path to the weirwood tree, beautiful little beacons that led into the darkness, lighting only the path and the grand ruby-red boughs of the sacred tree at the heart of the 3-acre wood. Even in broad daylight, it was dark in the godswood, and little could be seen this late in the day. The sounds of the castle were muffled. Occasionally they heard a branch snap underfoot, or a small animal darting through the undergrowth. All else was still and calm as they took their place before the weirwood. "Jon will be here in an hour," she informed Petter. "We have until then." She glanced around the woods, seeing only the darkness. Once she was satisfied all was concealed, she knelt before the tree and reached for one of its roots. Closing her eyes, she let the visions fill her mind for the first time in a long time. Only brief snatches of things the three-eyed crow had already showed her. Her mother burning the letter, Petter crying in a woodland. Then something new. Lyanna walking on the shore of the God's Eye, a letter in her hand. Petter looked on from afar. Still gripping the root, she whispered her brother's name. Brandon Stark, then Rickon Stark, Robb Stark, Eddard Stark, Catelyn Stark, Arya Stark, Lyanna Stark. A sudden breeze whispered through the treetops, sending down a bright red leaf. She shivered against the chill, then opened her eyes to find Petter looking positively alarmed. "What's all that about?" he asked. "Are you summoning them, like old magic?" Sansa laughed. "No, silly. We don't really pray like the faith do. We contemplate and sometimes speak to our dead, that's all. But now, I want to talk to you." She knew Bran would now be listening from afar, watching through the face of the weirwood. As for the others, she only said their names because she wanted it to sound like a proper prayer. But if it did raise them from the dead, then all the better. She wanted as many witnesses to this as possible. "You said your Aunt Lyanna's name, but not your Uncle Brandon," Petter observed. "How come?" Sansa shrugged. "I've never really thought of him. Besides, all I know about him is that he was cruel to you. I didn't feel right mentioning his name on our wedding day." Petter smiled almost wistfully. Yes, I still bear the mark of Brandon's esteem from collarbone to navel." "Do you remember what I said this morning?" she asked. "When I told you that my mother regretted not marrying you." "That was most curious, I must admit," replied Petter. "Who did she tell?" Sansa had it all worked out. She was nursing Bran after his fall, when he was in a coma. Often she was exhausted, and I think she was drinking to help her cope. Anyway, she would talk to him. He could not hear her, he was half dead, so she must have just opened up on that night. I went to visit him the night before I left for King's Landing. But when I heard Mother's voice, I assumed someone else was in there with them. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I waited outside until the other person left, and Mother was talking, saying things that didn't make sense at the time. She said about the letter she got before she married my father and how she could have married you. Pitcher looked skeptical, but clearly worried. "And what else did she say?" Sansa reached down her bodice and withdrew the document she signed earlier. "I've already proved my loyalty to you, and here is further proof. Before I carry the sentence out, I want you to tell me everything." Padir took the document and broke the seal, revealing Lord Royce's death warrant. He was unable to keep the smile from his face. After reading it through twice, he looked up at her again. "You will carry out the sentence?" he asked. "Our way is the old way. Who passes the sentence swings the sword," she explained. "And you will have unopposed control of the Vale. And now I have Brynden Tully here. I can bring you the Riverlands. My wedding gift to you." Patir folded up the warrant and handed it back to her. "Very well." And so it began. From the duel at Riverrun to his banishment to the fingers which brought him directly into Aunt Lyanna's path at Harrenhal. As had happened so many times in his life, an opportunity presented itself and he took full advantage. Lyanna overheard Lisa telling me about the baby, he explained. She thought we were in love and that her overbearing father was tearing us apart against our will. Given her circumstances, you can imagine how keen she was to help us. In return, I offered to help her by delivering a message to her brother and her betrothed, Robert Baratheon. She knew about the duel, but she didn't realize it was me on the receiving end of it. Peter paused there, looking up into the face of the weirwood. I never knew your aunt, besides her famous name and who her brother was. It was never personal. All I wanted was to get back at her brother. Brandon knew me all too well, and I knew he would have no further dealings with me. So I went straight to Robert and told him a version of the truth. Sansa's brow tightened. What do you mean by a version of the truth? I knew Robert would be making his way down from the awry to attend Cat and Brandon's wedding, so I intercepted him on the road and simply told him Prince Rhaegar had run off with Lyanna. I never said the word abducted. He came up with that all by himself. He, of course, wanted to go charging off straight to the capital to demand Rhaegar return her. But I convinced him to trust Brandon, that Rhaegar would be unable to refuse him, her lord and brother. More so than a fiancé. They could have gone together, for all I cared. All I wanted was Brandon out of my path so I could claim Catelyn. Did you know a war would start because of what you did? She asked, moving closer to him. Peter shrugged, his gaze becoming distant and unfocused, as he recalled the past. How could I thought, hoped even, that Brandon would be arrested and locked up. I never knew the Mad King, but I suspected he might react rather explosively to a troop of Northmen storming into his court. But burning them and then demanding the Lord's heirs as well, that was excessive, even by Aerys' standards. Sansa wanted to recoil, but she held herself steady and steeled herself for what else was to come. And after the war, what then? Much and more, he replied evasively. Robert gave me a position at court, courtesy of Jon Arryn's recommendation, which came from your Aunt Lysa. I climbed, she pined. Why did you instruct her to poison her husband, Lord Arryn? She asked. Somewhere nearby, a twig snapped and the undergrowth rustled. She paid it little mind. I needed him out of the way, Peter replied. Simply, you didn't have Lysé kill her husband because you loved her and wanted to be with her, she said. Otherwise, why would you have done what you did? Peter laughed. What? You mean, when I threw her through the moon door, I did that because she was proving problematic. She was irrational. She was talking too much. She told you she poisoned Jon Arryn to be with me. And by that time, I had Sweet Robin's trust, which meant I had the veil. More importantly, I had you. Everything was coming together nicely, and she was no longer helping. Sansa's heart was racing, but she fought to control her own reactions to what she was hearing. All the while, she had to think hard on what the wider implications were, the things she knew he wasn't telling her. She had to deduce and extrapolate, and the deeper she got, the harder it got. When Jon Arryn died, Lysa wrote to my mother telling her the Lannisters did it, she remembered. She knew my mother would tell my father, the new hand of the king. Lysa hadn't the wit to plan something like this, so it had to be you all along. He told her to blame the Lannisters, knowing it would bring the Starks into open conflict with them and the crown. You lacked an opportunity, so you manipulated Lysa into creating one. Sansa looked deep in his eyes to see if there was any sign of remorse there. All saw was that supercilious glint of amusement. No one can fabricate a war alone, sweetling. Now, when we are wed, I will gift you Sweet Robin's head, and I will hold the veil in my own right. Enough. Whatever Sansa was about to say was cut off abruptly. Petyr almost jumped out of his skin, and Sansa recoiled from him as if he had burned her. She leapt to her feet again and spun around to where she knew Lord Royce and his men had been listening in all along. She smiled as they stepped into the small circle of light, swords already drawn. There were 5 in total, but from what Sansa had seen, only one armed man would have been ample to overpower Petyr. I said enough, Baelish, Lord Royce repeated. I cannot bear to hear any more of your silver-tongued treachery. Petyr had fallen to his knees before the heart tree, his hands held up in supplication as he pleaded silently with Sansa. My lady, what are you doing? What is the meaning of this? Sansa allowed a half-smile to curl the corner of her lip. Finally, she could show the disdain and loathing she felt for the wretched creature kneeling before her. Deliberately, she touched the corner of Royce's warrant to a beacon and let it burn. "Twice you have burned this realm to the ground," she spat at him. "Did you really think I would be fool enough to join you as you attempted to do so a third time?" Removing herself from Baelish for the final time, she went to stand by Lord Royce's side. "My lord, I thank you for playing along with this mummer's farce today. It was the only way of getting the truth out of him. He murdered your lord, your lady, and plotted to kill their son. Do as you will with him." Defeated, Petting knew he had been outmaneuvered for the first and final time. Sansa looked at him again, just as Royce's men descended on him, and felt no pity. "Take him to the dungeons," she commanded. "I want him guarded day and night." She moved away from the circle of light, trying to get some air. Only then did she realize there are more people than she realized. Jon was there, with Brienne and Lords Glover. Manderley and Forrester were all looking on. Had they all seen her entrap and bring down the hated Petyr Baelish? She could only hope so. For a moment, they watched in silence as Baelish was bound and gagged. Only then did they all drop to one knee in a show of fealty. Relief washed over her, making her lightheaded and almost giddy. She drew a deep breath of cold night air to clear her spinning head and looked down the path back to the castle. It was then that she noticed the tall, hooded figure clad all in black watching from afar. She was dimly aware of Jon trying to get her attention, but for some reason she didn't seem to understand him properly. The silent watcher lifted their face, drawing back the deep hood of their cloak. Everyone seemed to notice then, bringing a silence over them all. Even Baelish stopped making those awful muffled noises as his captors bundled him up. The newcomer's hair was brittle and white, her skin the color of curdled milk, but it was the throat that got all of Saints' attention. The throat had been cut from ear to ear, leaving it little more than a red ruin. Whatever that creature was, there was little of Catelyn Stark left in it. A brisk wind swept the battlements as Jon surveyed the cobblestone yards below. Smoke poured from the windows of the forge, dissipating fast in the crisp air. It cheered him to once more hear the sounds of hammers on steel ringing from within. Not far from the forge, young squires trained in the practice yard as Ser Davos looked on. They would need a proper master-at-arms soon, but for now the old pirate would suffice. His gaze roamed the grounds far below, to where a sleek young greyhound sniffed keenly at the foliage growing at the base of the inner walls. The dog was a gift from Lord Glover to Sansa. A peace offering, more like, Jon thought wryly to himself. The dog continued following the scent until it reached the Tully carriage that had been left just beyond the inner gate, whereupon it stopped and cocked its hind leg. Jon couldn't help but smile at the dark, steaming stain spreading down the grain of the wood. He had lain awake half the night, replaying the moment he first looked into the back of that carriage. At first, he hadn't seen anything. The light was poor, and whatever was in there made no sound at all. It was only as his eyes adjusted to the gloom that he realized it was a person. A person unlike any other, whose mutilated face resonated deeply with him. Only a second later did the realization of who she was drop like a stone in the pit of his guts. He wanted to deny at first she was dead. But so was Rhaegar. So was he. Reality hit him in the face like a final insult. Had he been given a choice of who to bring back from among his many dead, Catelyn Stark wouldn't have even entered his head. He would have brought back Sansa's old direwolf before her mother, and he felt no shame in that. What he did feel was angry. Angry that she had risen again, while Robb and Uncle Eddard lay dead and buried. Angry that it was her who came through those gates, and not Arya or Bran. He tried to be angry with poor Brienne, who had brought her home, but that was useless. Brienne was sworn to Sansa, and Catelyn was Sansa's family. One of only 3 of Sansa's family left alive, assuming Arya wasn't dead. It was only that realization that brought a pang of guilt to his heart. I should be happy for Sansa's sake, he thought. He had his father back, a father he never knew he had. Now Sansa had her mother too, but it's Catelyn bloody Tully, the demon on his shoulder, pointed out, and it was useless. Good morrow, cousin. Sansa's voice was light and soft as she approached him on the battlements. She walked with a spring in her step, now that the Northern Lords had all sworn their fealty to her. She stood taller, she looked him dead in the eye and dared them to defy her with a smile on her face. If any even dared, they knew they'd be joining company with poor Petyr Baelish down in the dungeons. Your absence was noted as we broke our fast, she added, drawing level with him. Jon shrugged. I thought it'd Diplomatic, he answered. Under the circumstances, Sansa looked puzzled. What do you mean? It was only breakfast. Have you eaten anything at all? He hadn't, and his stomach betrayed him by rumbling loudly. That answered her question, so she linked her arm through his own and tried to steer him away, only for him to dig his heels in. Jon, what's wrong? She asked, meeting his gaze with a twinkle in her eye. Tell me now, or I'll pull your leg hair. Laughter burst out of him before he could stop himself, throwing up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. I've fought Boltons and wildlings and armies of the undead, but please, my lady, spare me my leg hair. Sansa delivered a playful smack to his arm, but her smile died a death a heartbeat later. She looked down at her feet, then out over the yard, anywhere but directly at him. It's her, isn't it? She said sadly. Even as they laughed, Catelyn had been a monster in the room they did their best to ignore. I'm pleased that you have your mother back, he said. It was a sentiment that lacked conviction. That's not my mother. The force of her reply took him aback. It sounded almost like a rebuke. He turned to look at her, but she had taken to surveying the practice yard again. But her expression was hard. She had her Wardeness of the North face back on. It was same mask Eddard had worn, and Robb too, undoubtedly. I know she's not quite as you remember her. Sansa laughed, but this time the mirth did not reach her eyes. Those bright and beautiful Tully blue eyes. She composed herself swiftly. It's not just because she looks different, Jon. There's more to it. She's gone. Her essence, the thing that made her my mother, it's gone. She's not like you or the prince. Death has taken so much more from her than it did you and Rhaegar. His own shock had now clouded the memory of his reunion with Catelyn, and he struggled to recall the way she looked at him, but he knew what Sansa meant. Although Catelyn had always looked at him with contempt, but now it was something else. Something harder, more hateful, and it was no longer reserved only for him. She looked at everyone with that same expression on her face. Brynden told me what happened to her, he said, that she was with the Brotherhood without banners hanging Freys and Lannisters. Whether they were involved in the Red Wedding or not, it makes no matter. She just hangs then anyway. She had been dead for 3 full days and nights by the time they found her, on the riverbank, said Sansa. It was cruel of them to bring her back. Melisandre said she would never have done it. Jon was inclined to agree. Whenever he looked at the gouges running down Catelyn's face, where her nails had raked at her flesh, he didn't need to be told she did that as she watched Robb die. The gaping wound across her throat had almost been a mercy after that, but now she was back, with her memories intact and reliving the moment of her eldest son's death over and over again. Have you spoken to her? He asked. Sansa shook her head. My guards woke me in the middle of the night. They said she was trying to get into my room. When they left, I barred the door. Her face reddened, as though she was ashamed of rejecting her own mother. Half a heartbeat later, her eyes welled with tears. It's not that I don't want to see her. I just don't know what to say to her. I feel so guilty because it should be Robb in my place. Not me, or even Rickon, or Bran, or Arya. Not me. Jon pulled her into a tight hug before she could break down. None of this is your fault, and even she must realize that. It wasn't his fault he had been raised as Ned Stark's bastard either, but that hadn't stopped her from blaming him for it all. However, Jon couldn't bring himself to tell that to Sansa. Instead, he tilted her chin up and dabbed at her tears with the pad of his thumb. It crossed his mind to kiss her, but she soon composed herself. Sansa cleared her throat and abruptly changed the subject. So how's your father? Jon nodded. Good. He's well. He misses his children and, well, you can imagine, I should have kissed her, he thought to himself. I think he finds the North too cold. Targaryens need their heat. Her stance softened again, a smile returning to her face as her gaze met his. I'm so pleased you're talking to him. You've been given a chance to get to know him and find out who you really are. Whatever it is Rhaegar has planned, we can at least be grateful for that. Jon knew Rhaegar was already planning to leave. They had heard reports that Daenerys Stormborn was amassing troops and ships ready to cross the narrow sea. Then they'd heard reports that Asha Greyjoy had fled the Iron Islands with Theon in tow. Lord Glover reported that they were last seen sailing into the sunset with most of the Iron Fleet under their command. Even if they were joining his aunt, Jon's feelings toward Theon were still murderous at best. He decided that it would be for the best if Rhaegar were the one awaiting them at Dragonstone. I am grateful, he finally replied. But it is very strange to have a father that's only 2 or 3 years older than me. He feels more like a brother, or a long-lost friend. I never knew I had. He had never fared well when trying to explain his feelings and relationships with other people. Something Sansa seemed to understand. Spend time with him, she suggested. Get to know him and love will follow. He drew a deep breath, letting it out again in a long sigh. I'll try, and maybe you should do likewise with Catelyn. Maybe, she conceded. After a brief pause, she added, You deserve to have her know the truth about you. Jon frowned at the wording. I deserve to have her know the truth about me. What do you mean? You saved Winterfell. You saved the Starks. You saved me. You deserve the opportunity to stand in front of her and tell who and what you really are, she explained. Tell her everything. It's not like she can betray your secrets to anyone. Do you mean it? He asked, heartbeat racing. She can't speak more than a few words. No, I meant the bit about saving Winterfell, he corrected. It's the truth, she insisted. You did. And you sought no recognition, you sought no favor or glory. You didn't try to steal the castle like she always thought you would. You just did it for us. Even though you're not our brother after all. There's no greater sacrifice than that. I did it because I love you, he replied, then quickly added. All of you, Bran, Rickon and Arya. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And for you, he kissed her then. It happened fast, he didn't know who initiated it, but their lips met and joined, and stayed together for that little bit longer than either of them intended. Simultaneously, they pulled back and cleared their throats. All the same, Jon felt the color rising in his face as he turned to look out over the yards again. The sparrers were still sparring. The forge was still hammering and belching great plumes of smoke into the pale skies. Snow was not far away, he knew. Well, I had best do as you suggested and find my father, he murmured, turning to leave. See you at supper, she called after him. Wear the new coat I made you. He stopped, still with his back to her, and smiled even though she could not see it. Rhaegar unrolled the map, weighting the corners down with dusty old ornaments depicting carved direwolves. The Starks, he assumed, had thousands of such trinkets stuffed away in old boxes in every room in the castle. They wouldn't object as he liberated for them. Once they were in place, he could see the whole of Westeros and the free cities picked out in ink and dye spread out before him. Slowly, he tracked the eastern coastline all the way down to Dragonstone. If Sir Davos could yield the castle to him, he could open the gates to Daenerys. From there, it was tantalizingly close to King's Landing. His thoughts trailed off as he looked at the black and white castle that was meant to be the Red Keep. He knew every secret passage into that castle, every twist and turn of the passages, and which vaults were where. How many had Robert found, he wondered, and even if he had found them, would he have sealed them? Seeing as they would be taking up to 4 dragons into combat, it hardly seemed to matter, but he couldn't help but be curious. If he could get in, if he could reach Cersei and talk sense into her. The knock at his chamber door jolted him from his reverie. The sound was followed soon after by Jon inching open the door and peering tentatively around the edge. Come in, he beckoned, grateful for the interruption. Jon still hesitated. I can come back later. If you're busy. No, insisted Rhaegar. There's something I wanted to tell you, anyway. Jon finally entered the room, and he noticed he was dressed in the coat Sansa had made for him, the one that made him look like Eddard Stark. Deciding not to mention it, he instead pulled up seats for them in an alcove overlooking the godswood outside. You leavin'? Asked Jon, glancing at the map. Soon, he confirmed. I thought I might jump out at Cersei Lannister and give her the fright of her life. Jon laughed. She's mad enough already, I think. I have a feeling that's not what you were planning on telling me, though. Not quite, he replied. It's about the night I was brought back here, in the flames, by Melisandre. Jon's brow creased into a frown. What of it? When it happened to you, and you woke up in the past, did you see things? Visions, I mean? No, or not that I can remember, he answered. It's just that I did, Rosier explained, and I saw her. Catelyn, Lady Stoneheart, or whatever they're calling her these days. I thought it was a wedding in a godswood, but everyone was there to see Baelish arrested, and I got it wrong. But I saw Catelyn with her throat cut and her face torn up. Well, it's not a face one easily forgets, is it? His own chest was still marred by Robert's warhammer. If he reached under his tunic, he could feel where it had caved in the left-hand side, marked by the broken ribs. It was a permanent reminder of his failure on the battlefield. Still, he thought he'd never complain about his own injuries ever again after seeing the state of Catelyn Stark. Meanwhile, Jon did not look unduly fazed by the revelation. Maybe it was just a glimpse of things to come. "What else did you see?" "A girl who looked like Lyanna cutting an old man's throat," he recalled, "and another girl riding on the back of a huge black dragon." "A girl who looked like Lyanna," Jon repeated, leaning forward in his seat. "Tell me about her." But Rhaegar had told him all he knew. "I thought it was her. I thought it was Lyanna, but I didn't see her for long enough. The image was gone in a flash. All I saw was her slicing into the old man's throat. She was in a hall, but the light was poor." He cast around for more information, but time had eroded anything else that might have been there. All he could remember was the girl's face, and her striking resemblance to Lyanna. Only then did he remember why it couldn't have been her. "She was too young to be Lyanna," he pointed out. "Besides, I don't think she has any reason to go around murdering old men." "No," agreed Jon, "but I know someone who does." They lapsed into silence, but Rhaegar could see that Jon was still deep in thought. As he grew to know his son, he learned his mannerism and quirks, and those deep, brooding silences were prominent among them. "The other girl must have been Daenerys," Jon added, at length. "There's no one else who could be riding a dragon." "Stands to reason," Rhaegar agreed. "But the Lyanna look-alike." Jon's expression closed off again, as he sank back into his thoughts. "I have a feeling. No, I know who it must be. She's cut his throat like he cut hers." "She didn't have a cut throat," he pointed out. "No, I mean hers as in Catelyn's," Jon clarified. "I think it's Catelyn's other daughter, Arya." "If that old man was Walder Frey, we'll soon hear about it," he said. "But as it stands, we know nothing for certain." "Who else could it be?" Jon retorted. "Trust me, Jon. Walder Frey does not lack for enemies," Rhaegar pointed out kindly. "It was so when my father was king. Since then, it would appear he's collected a few more enemies, like the whole of the North, number of enemies. And that's on top of the whole of the Riverlands." Jon sighed heavily, kneading at the space between his eyes, as if a headache was brewing. It was clear he wanted that gray-eyed girl to be his cousin, and now regret dashing his hopes so soon. He quickly thought of a way to make amends. "Tomorrow, after Bellish has been dealt with, I'm leaving for Dragonstone," he stated. "It would make me very happy if you came too. We can look for Arya together, now that we know roughly where she is. Our road will take us through the Riverlands anyway." When Jon met his gaze, he looked almost relieved, like something else was wrong, and getting away from Winterfell would be beneficial. But Rhaegar decided against pressing for details at that moment. Whatever was happening, Jon would tell him in his own good time. Meanwhile, it seemed they both had a long journey to prepare for. The Lords of the Vale have begun to drift homeward, setting out before winter cut them off completely. Meanwhile, the Northern Lords were out hunting, making the most of it before they too were affected by the storms and snowdrifts heading their way. Many had taken their squires, knights, and servants with them and left Winterfell near empty. Only the Tullys remained, and they were few in number, and nowhere to be seen as Sansa took her place at the high table. From there, she watched as the back door opened and a cowled figure slowly shuffled down the center aisle. Her mother's progress was slow, hampered further by whatever she was carrying in her right hand. But when she got to help, a hand was raised to signal all was well and not to bother. Still hesitant, Sansa sat back down again and continued to watch her mother's cumbersome advance. All the while, she tried to picture the woman her mother had been, still handsome, even in her late 30s. Slim and strong and dignified, fierce as a lioness where her children were concerned. But all the things that had made her who she was had died at the Twins, and only a shade had risen on the riverbanks 3 days later. When she made it to the high table, Catelyn sat to Sansa's right, the same seat she took when she was Lady of Winterfell. These days, it was Jon's seat. Before saying anything, Sansa studied her carefully, trying to read the expression in her eyes. There was nothing of Catelyn Stark to be found there, either, only a dead-eyed hatred. "When Jon comes for his supper, you will have to find somewhere else to sit. That's his place now," Sansa informed her coolly. But until then, the pale white hand reached for the open throat, covering the gaping wound to allow her to speak. The single word rasping out of her like gravel on concrete: Snow. Had the living Catelyn Stark been asked to stand aside for Jon Snow, She shuddered to think what would have happened. It wouldn't have happened anyway. Now that it happened, it seemed her mother was beyond expressing any true feelings. As she pondered what might be going on behind that mask-like face, she noticed the sword Catelyn had been carrying. She had propped it against the table, and the smooth metal glimmered in the light of the candles. Meanwhile, the two of them looked at each other. Both seemed to be searching for something in the other's faces, and Sansa couldn't help but feel she was falling short. "Jon is in the snow," she stated, blandly. Catelyn showed no reaction. She only reached for the sword and handed it to Sansa. As she held it closer, she could see it was Uncle Brandon's. Once more, her mother reached to plug the wound at her throat, but Sansa didn't need to hear her say it. "Busier," she said for her. "I know who it's for." Catelyn's hand faltered, then reached for Sansa's hair, as she always used to do. She felt her gnarled fingers run through a thick auburn lock, snagging gently on some unseen knot. Her lip trembled then, her eyes filling with tears at this ghost of a motherly gesture, a brief flicker of the mother she used to be. She tried to speak again, but with the throat still open, all that happened was a noiseless, formless rush of rattling air escape her larynx, and nothing could be discerned. But Sansa knew she understood what was trying to be said. "I love you too," she answered, tremulously. Catelyn's features contorted, the cowl slipping from her head to reveal the patchy, brittle hair. It was as silver-white as a Targaryen's, but already Sansa was starting to see past all that. There was still little of her mother left, but wasn't a stranger either. That thought made her think of the Southern gods, the Seven, the Stranger, dishing out death, and of Catelyn hanging the Freys. It made Sansa shiver. Renewing her grip on the sword, she pulled herself together. "But it won't be passing the sentence tomorrow. It won't be me swinging the sword." Supper began before long, and Catelyn removed herself not only from the high table but from the great hall altogether. The sight of Jon, dressed for all to see like a lord of Winterfell, sent her retreating into the shadows. But Sansa had steeled herself and inwardly refused to buckle. They were in charge of Winterfell, her and Jon. Even the Tullys had to accept that now. As soon as supper was over, she decided to forego the dancing that normally followed. The others still wanted to celebrate the fall of the Boltons, and she wasn't about to stop them. But tonight, there was someone she had to see and a special sword to deliver. The following morning dawned heavy with the threat of snow. It made Rhaegar shiver deep in the furs he had borrowed from Jon as he stepped out into the courtyard. They were all there. Brynn and Tully, the former Lady Stark, the current Lady Stark and Wardeness of the North. Jon stood at her side, silent and somber. Lining the walls were Lords Royce, Glover, Manderly, Forrester, Serwyn, and Nori. Lady Mormont stood belly-high to the shortest man among them, but her chin jutted proudly, and she more than made herself their equal. Unnervingly, each and every one of them turned to watch Rhaegar as he walked across the yard. It had been swept overnight, and the cobbles washed down, but a fine frost had formed overnight that made the stones glisten and sparkle under the rising sun. He paused, composing himself with a few deep breaths of crisp air, then continued to the center of the yard where the block had been placed, and the prisoner knelt, blindfolded and subdued by two burly guards in stark livery. Rosier looked down at the man who had started the war, which had killed his family. Whether Baelish meant to do it or not, he no longer cared. The outcome was just the same. Lyanna was dead. Aegae, Ryansh, and Elie, all dead. His father, his mother, and all their loyal friends, dead in a usurper's war, fought on the basis of a spurned lover's lie. "Lord Biatch, would you speak any final words?" Silence thickened as the condemned man made no sound. The wait was painful, and Rhaegar took the opportunity to locate Sansa Stark. It had been her idea that he should be the one to pass the sentence and swing the sword. It had been he who had lost the most, whose family had suffered the most, and he knew he would always be grateful to her for allowing him to be the one to deliver the justice his dead children deserved. The lords still looked at him curiously. They had been expecting Sansa to perform this duty, not some stranger they couldn't quite place. However, Sansa met his gaze quickly and nodded her head. It was time. In a sure, firm voice loud enough for all to hear, he declared, "I, Rhaegar of House Targaryen, Lord of Dragonstone, do sentence you to die in the name of Sansa of House Stark, Lady of Winterfell and Wardeness of the North." At the sound of his name, a murmur broke out among the assembled lords. But soon their eagerness to see this business concluded took over, and they settled slowly. Rhaegar allowed them time before drawing Brandon Stark's sword. The edge had been re-tempered in the forge just the day before, and the razor edge caught the light, dazzling white. Rhaegar lifted the blade, aligning the stroke against the target, barely shuddered involuntarily as the blade touched the hairs at the back of his neck. He flinched, turned his head as if to cry out for Sansa to rush in and help him. But Rhaegar made an end of it, as swift and silent as the wind. The blade passed through bone and sinew and gristle, coming away red as blood soaked the frosted cobbles. Drawing a deep breath, Rhaegar looked to the skies as the body crumpled and fell dead at his feet. Only a sudden chest pain made Sansa realize she'd been holding her breath since Rhaegar raised his sword. Now Peter's body lay broken and leaking into fresh snowfalls. She exhaled a rush of air so fast it made her head spin. The air around her was filled with discontented, murmuring voices, but she couldn't make out a word they were saying. She was buffeted by them as they dispersed from the scene of the execution, but she remained rooted to the spot. All the while, she kept her gaze fixed on the corpse bleeding in the fresh snow. It was over. He was over. No more lies. No more manipulation. Petyr could go and play his games in the Seven Hells, for all she ought to care. But even as she thought those thoughts, she tried to find some deed, some redemptive act, to give the dead man just a shred of honor. He did what he did for love, she tried to remind herself, but the consequences of those actions were all around her. They had shaped her, and they had led her and him to this moment. Her view of the body was suddenly obscured as two burly guards in stark livery appeared, stooped over the body, and picked him up by the arms and legs. Like a sack of bloodied potatoes, Petyr's body sagged between them. A third bagged up the severed head and knotted it closed, but they did not move. They turned to look at her, questioningly. It took a moment for her to realize they had no idea what to do with the body, and neither did she. But she thought she knew someone who would. Pack him in ice and send him to Cersei. Lord Manderley will arrange your passage from White Harbor. She was about to turn and join the others in the Great Hall, when, as an afterthought, she added, "And do remember to send House Lannister our regards." The guards paled, but made no protest. Cersei would not be able to hurt them, nor did Sansa think she would be inclined to. Petyr was as much a thorn in her side as he was the Starks, and every other noble house who had fallen victim to his machinations. They all needed to know that the master manipulator was dead. More importantly, they needed to know it was the Starks who had finished him off. House Stark was back, and Petyr was the unwitting messenger who would spread word of their return. As she turned away, a messenger appeared at the gates of the castle, but she couldn't make out the sigil he bore. However, satisfied that Tybalt was dealing with him, she continued on to the Great Hall. Jon was the first person she saw, cup of small ale in hand, Ghost at his heels, and watching as the northern lords flocked around his father. Each, it seemed, had a score of unanswered questions. "I hope they give him room to speak," she remarked, stopping at his side. "He'll not get a word in edgeways." Jon seemed concerned. He's used to it. He returned to watching the gaggle of men crowding around the prince. Whatever else he was thinking, he kept it to himself and sipped at his ale. Up on the dais, Catelyn watched over them all, silent and ominous. "What about her?" she asked, nodding to her mother. Without looking, Jon seemed to know who she was referring to. "She said nothing to me." "Have you told her anything?" "Only that you aren't a Snow," she replied. "I didn't tell her how or who. I thought I'd leave that up to you." "Thank you, Sansa," he said. His expression darkened as he forced a smile that quickly died. "But I don't think I owe her any explanations or justifications or anything else, really." Sansa didn't see it that way. She saw his true birth as vindication, not justification. But sensing his lingering hurt over the way Catelyn had treated him, she did not press the matter. Instead, she took a cup of ale from a passing servant, while Jon remained silent. He seemed withdrawn, preoccupied, almost like he didn't want her there. She remembered the kiss, feeling a twang of regret she found hard to ignore. "When are you leaving?" she asked, just to try and start a proper conversation. "Tomorrow, at first light," he answered. Rhaegar wanted to leave today, but Datsley intervened. Sansa gave a dry laugh. Only Petyr could disrupt a person's plans, even when he's dead. Finally, Jon smiled a natural smile. His dark gray eyes glittered in the light of the nearby candles. Ghost got up and began snuffling at the pocket of her cloak, the place she normally kept scraps of bacon treats for him, But this morning she had none, and the dire wolf took to licking her fingers. Now that Jon had relaxed, she felt emboldened again. "You're not leaving because of her, are you?" she asked, hoping he wouldn't retreat again. Although he stayed put, he seemed reticent. He glanced about the hall, this way and that, before beckoning to follow him. She did so, letting him lead her out into an antechamber through a back door near the dais. As she passed her mother, she felt them both being watched. "I didn't want to say anything in case it turns out to be nothing," he said, closing the door behind her. "But the night we brought Rhaegar back, he saw things in the fires." "Like what?" she asked. "He saw you freeing the dragon from the crypts. Then he saw Catelyn, but didn't recognize her because of the injuries," he answered. "He even said it was a wedding in the godswood, but the wedding was the ruse you used to get Baelish out there. Then he saw a girl who looks like Lyanna cutting an old man's throat." Sansa's heartbeat pounded as she made the connection. "Axlier." Recovering herself quickly, she added, "But where?" "She could be anywhere, and an old man holds no clues." "You're wrong," Jon insisted. "Why would Arya kill an old man, unless he'd done some great wrong to her or her family?" "Walder Frey," she sighed. "But how do we know if she's done it yet? She won't hang around waiting to be caught." Then her blood ran cold and a dead weight settled in her stomach as she thought of the possibilities. Images filled her head of Arya storming into the twins and hacking at the old lord in a fit of blind rage, not caring who saw her just as long as she got her revenge. Just as she did with Joffrey when the butcher's boy got hurt. She tried to remember his name, but it had faded from memory. Gods, Jon! What if she sacrificed herself to avenge Robb and Mother? It's exactly the brave, foolish thing she would do. As much as she wanted Jon to disagree with her, to tell her she was all wrong, he didn't. He knew their sister as well as she did. "Exactly," he said, darkly. "I need to at least try to find her before she does anything stupid. The Freys will skin her and dish her up for their supper if they catch her." Without even realizing, Sansa had a hold of Jon's arms. "I would that I could go with you, but I cannot. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell," he cut over her. "I understand, and given what happened the last time there were no Starks in Winterfell, I utterly insist that you stay." Despite her fears, she laughed again and released her grip on him, but she stopped herself before she could kiss him again, despite how much she wanted to. "Only because he's bringing Arya home," she told herself. "Well, I guess that's about it then," he said, looking past her toward the door. "Yes," she agreed. But when Jon moved to the right, so did she, and they collided with each other before Jon could reach the door. Bumping into each other, they both laughed and sputtered fumbled apologies. Even those collided becoming lost in each other. Seven hells, Sansa thought and cast caution to the wind, as she kissed him full on the mouth. Through this kiss, she needed him to know that she had wanted the last one too. But Jon pulled back, red in the face, and no longer able to look her in the eye. Regret jumped out at her like a brigand in the night. Had she misread the signs? Probably. She felt as stupid as the girl Cersei always told her she was. As they fell silent, the voices of the men in the great hall seemed to grow louder. I thought you wanted," she stammered, wishing the ground would swallow her. "The fault is mine," he interjected. "Forgive me, I shouldn't have done that. It was wrong of me and you're not to blame." He was still looking at the ground, but she could see the shame etched in his face. Once more he reached for the door, and, this time, she stood aside, only for him to freeze with his hand on the door handle, not moving. Unable to resist the urge, she looked at him, wondering what was going on inside his head. By now, surely, the lords outside would realize they were not siblings, just cousins. Is that what worries him? She wondered to herself. She dared to hope, if it was, they would soon set them straight. There was no impropriety. But Jon was still frozen, glaring intently at the door handle as though contemplating it deeply. His lower lip trembled, his brow tightened. "Gods be good. I need you." It was a confession that sounded like it had been wrenched by force from the depths of his being. The noise of the crowd seemed to grow louder as Jon caved in, sagging in defeat as he kissed her again. This time neither of them thought against it. They closed their eyes and let the world fade into the background, until a particularly loud shout brought them crashing back into reality. Jon looked worried now, almost afraid, and that, in turn, rubbed off on her. "What was that?" The noise levels rose again, bringing them both to the edge, as the sound of fighting could be heard. A table overturned, and curses filled the hall beyond. Without wasting another moment, Sansa pulled open the door and strode back into the hall with Jon at her side. "What is all this?" she demanded firmly. The lords and many of their retainers had formed a knotted group around a figure kneeling on the floor. It was a sparse man of indeterminate height while he was being pinned to the ground on his knees by Mormont men. His nose was bleeding and his lips split. When he opened his mouth to speak, she could see white teeth slick with fresh blood. From behind, a retainer in Cerwyn livery was holding the stranger's head up via a fistful of hair. "I come under a banner of peace," he protested. The words were thick through swelling lips. Anger flamed inside her. "Let him up, my lords. This is now how Stark treats with strangers." Had they taken leave of their senses, she wondered. This was not how they were, she knew that. But Lord Cerwyn was defiant as he prodded at the prisoner. "Tell my lady who sent you." Sansa looked back to the captive, expecting answers. "The phrase," the man rasped. "The new Lord Walder sent me, my lady. A banner of peace, I swear it true." Under the dirty tunic, she could just about make out the twin towers of House Frey. Sansa felt her stomach churn. At her side, Jon drew long claw and directed it at the captive's throat. "My brother, King Robb, and all his loyal men came to Lord Walder under guest rights, and he slaughtered them anyway," she said, coolly. "Tell me again why my lords should respect your peace banner." Her question was met with a chorus of eyes from the lords, all of whom had lost sons, brothers, men, and even a sister or two at the Red Wedding. Little Lyanna Mormont's expression was hard as stone as she beheld the hapless messenger. "The Red Wedding was none of my doing, my lady," he said, imploring her. "No one picks their family, and if they could, do you think I'd have picked that garrulous old weasel?" Before Sansa could say anything, Brynden Tully had materialized at her side and was looking upon the captive with contempt. "Did you say the new Lord Frey? What happened to the old one?" The captive ignored Brynden and kept his hopeful gaze on Sansa. "Let me up, my lady, and I'll tell you everything." Everyone was interested now, so she didn't have to give the command. Cerwyn's retainer released his grip on the Frey's hair, but Jon kept Longclaw drawn and trained on the man as he staggered to the nearest seat. Sansa made no apologies for his treatment. However, he could have expected no less when coming into Winterfell. He must have thought the castle was still in Bolton hands. Sansa thought she already knew what was coming next. "The old Lord Walder is dead," he said, to no one's surprise. "We found him after a feast with his throat cut open." Brynden stifled a laugh. "Poetic justice. If ever I knew it, where's my nephew?" "Gone with the Lannisters to Casterly Rock," the messenger answered. "Jaime Lannister took him after the surrender of Riverrun." Sansa turned to her great-uncle, watching him turn a violent shade of purple. Even with the old Lord Walder dead, the Freys would be in no hurry to relinquish their new castle. The Frey that held it, now, was married to Tywin Lannister's sister. Sansa knew, but only one thing preoccupied her mind now, and it wasn't bricks and mortar. "Did you catch who was responsible?" she asked, stepping closer to the messenger. He shook his head, and she tried not to look as immensely relieved as she felt. "It was a serving girl," he said. "She didn't look local, and we thought she was with the Lannisters. But none of them knew who she was either. She's not been seen since the feast." "What did she look like?" Jon asked, taut as a bowstring. "A beauty, she was. We all noticed her," he replied. His explanations grew harder to understand, as his split lip continued to swell. Deep brown eyes, black hair, and dark skin. Like I said, an exotic look to her that we all wanted a taste of. Whoever that poor girl was, Sansa pitied her. No one deserved the Frey weasels pawing at them, but she could only be relieved that she looked nothing like Arya. The girl was an innocent, and Sansa couldn't let on that she knew. "For the sake of justice in this realm, I pray you find her," she said coolly. "But you will not be leaving this castle. Guards, remove this man to the dungeons. I would question him further." Sleep proved elusive that night. Jon tossed and turned in his bed, scrunching his eyes closed and trying to wipe his mind clean of all that ailed him. But if it wasn't Arya keeping him awake, it was Catelyn, or Rhaegar, or the others and the Night's Watch that he had left behind. However, more than any of that, it was Sansa. No matter how he tried to push them all out of his thoughts, they found a way to sneak back in. If Catelyn's face reared up in his head, he rolled onto his side and buried his face in his furs to try and block her out. If it was Virye, he was face down and shouting into his pillow to muffle the sound. The others, as always, made the hairs at the back of his neck stand on end. bringing a cold sweat breaking across his brow. So he lay on his back and looked up at the canopy above him, trying to pinpoint the exact moment his feelings for Sansa changed. Or had they? Thinking about it in the dead of night, it felt more like his feelings hadn't so much changed, but gone charging out of all control. He tried to think what Uncle Eddard would say. After all, he had raised them as siblings. But even Eddard couldn't deny that they were nothing of the sort. Despite that, shame plagued him. He should have stopped it. He should have removed himself from her as soon as he began to feel this way. He should have done the same with Yaxley and cursed himself for a fool, for always wanting the women he couldn't and shouldn't have. The more he thought about it, the more the chamber walls seemed to close in on him. Unable to bear it any longer, he rolled out of bed and pulled on some clean breeches and the same shirt he'd worn that day. Given the hour, he didn't bother with his boots and prepared to head to the hall in his bare feet. Before leaving, he clicked his fingers to signal for Ghost to follow. Having already stirred from his fireside slumber, the wolf came padding along without hesitation. Neither of them made a sound as together they trod the cold stone passageways of the castle. Down the turnpike stair, he emerged into a wide open gallery with a door at the far end which would take him to the great hall. Not wanting to disturb the servants, however, he detoured to the kitchen to get some spare cuts of meat for Ghost and bread, cheese and ale for himself. They ate together in the still warm kitchens, while outside snow drifted silently past the windows of the sleeping castle. No longer sunk deep in his own turmoil, Jon felt something like contentment as he and his wolf ate together. They didn't stay long once they'd finished, just long enough for Jon to top up his tankard of ale before heading for the hall where the fires would still be burning. And it was there that he found her. She was sitting up at the high table in her old seat, toying with a bronze crown of swords. When she heard him enter, she stopped and looked at him. She was a nightmare made flesh, but he had grown accustomed to that. He almost smiled to himself as he considered that the outward flesh merely reflected the bitterness that had always been within her. "You're in my seat, Catelyn," he said, loud enough for her to hear. She had scared him when she first arrived. True enough. But that fear was gone now. He didn't know what was left in its wake, perhaps nothing, or less than nothing. Dead or alive, he had faced a lot worse than her. And he knew he no longer had anything to fear. However, even as he approached the high table, Catelyn did not move. Her hand closed over the wound at her throat, and he found himself getting much closer than he intended, just to hear what she was about to say. "He's dead," she rasped, fixing him with a keen and cold gaze. "You?" "For a while," he confirmed. "Not as dead as you, though, eh?" Only a handful of tallow candles guttered on a nearby candelabra. The rest of the light came from a pale half-moon shining through the high windows of the hall. It made Catelyn look even more spectral, even more savage. The congealed blood at her open throat shone like silver. Similarly, silvered streaks ran down her face, where her nails had gouged great tracks in her face. "Whose is the crown?" he asked, settling into a seat at her side. "The one normally now occupied by Sansa." He didn't really need an answer, but she provided one anyway. Rosier's. Jon had thought as much, and gently took it from her. It was made of bronze and hastily forged. The original crown of the kings in the north was long gone, so clearly Robb had to make do. After studying it closely, he gave it back to her. "I'm surprised you let that sorry farce go as far as it did," he said, thinking aloud more than anything else. "When I heard about Robb's campaign, I almost abandoned the Night's Watch, but I'd already said the words and my friends dragged me back." He smiled at the memory, remembering the old Lord Commander's exact words and paraphrasing them aloud. "My friends brought me back, and honor made me stay. That would be the honor you told everyone I didn't have. The honor that got me killed." The shawl around her head slipped as she grasped at its edges, revealing her bone-white hair. Death really had been unkind to Catelyn Tully. "Bastard," she rasped. Clearly, she hadn't been listening when Sansa divulged his little secret. Jon smiled a half-smile, a small and empty gesture of amusement. Eddard lied to protect her, and she had never stopped punishing him for it. "Back then, if you had known the truth about me, Catelyn, you'd soon be wishing I really was just a bastard born to an unknown camp follower," he laughed aloud. But it sounded bitter. "You thought I'd be a danger to you, and I was. I was a danger to anyone who spoke to me. Whoever gave me shelter, but not because I'm a grasping bastard with no sense of honor." Catelyn was gripping Rob's old crown so hard the bronze swords were digging into her bloodless fingers. There was a cold, hard hatred in her eyes that would have bored right through him if he still cared. Her other hand was now gripping her throat so tight it was as if she was trying to strangle herself. "Whore," she said. "Whore's son." "That's no way to talk about your sister-in-law," he chided, mockingly. Whatever she was going to try to say next, she changed her mind and cocked her head. Those hateful eyes narrowed, homing in on him further. He spared her the effort, while not wanting to spell it all out for her. "Didn't you find it odd that Eddard went looking for his sister and came back with a baby?" he asked, not flinching from her gaze. "You're not stupid, you never were. Looking back now, I can't help but wonder at how you didn't figure it out. You must have known that Lyanna eloped with Rhaegar willingly. Your sister met her at Harrenhal when Petyr Baelish was being taken back to the Fingers. Surely she told you." Clearly Lysa had told her nothing. Catelyn continued to gaze at him, crown still gripped in one hand. "You?" she asked. "Me," he confirmed. "Lyanna is my mother, Rhaegar, my father. They were married in secret, months before I was even conceived." He paused and drank the rest of his ale, having almost forgotten he'd brought it from the kitchens. Meanwhile, Ghost hadn't settled at all. He wound his way between Jon's chair and Catelyn's, walking a figure eight around them. "You were so worried about my usurping Rob's inheritance that you didn't stop to consider how you'd discourage him from throwing it away all by himself," he observed sadly. "Your interference dragged the North to hell and you dumped it there for Sansa and I to pick up. Looking back on it now, you were the biggest danger to the North and no one realized. As for me, Catelyn, I could take this whole realm if I wanted. Never mind the North, but I won't, because my place is here, at Lady Sansa's right-hand side, serving her as I should have served Rob. You were wrong about me. I've always known my place." He took no pleasure from the home truths he told her. Each one made him feel sadder, more defeated, even though he had scored them their biggest victories since the glory days of Rob's early battles. But one slip was all it took for Rob to fail, and that was something Jon reminded himself of every day. Just one slip. "I don't hate you, Catelyn," he continued. "I never did. I feared you, but that's not the same as hate. But I went to Wall and learned to be the man you never thought I could ever be, and I all but forgot about you. Then when I found out the truth about my parents, I felt a little bit sorry for you. You were lied to as much as me, after all. But now that I've seen you like this, I pity you. Death would be kinder, and even Sansa said the same." By the time he stopped talking, Catelyn was no longer looking at him. She wasn't trying to speak either. She was staring forlornly at the double doors at the back of the hall, all malice gone from her eyes. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking, but Jon found that he didn't need her reply. He didn't need her approval or an acknowledgement that she was wrong. He just needed her to know she was wrong. And there was just one more thing he needed her to know. "Tomorrow I'm leaving Winterfell with my real father, Rhaegar Targaryen, and we're going to find Arya to bring her home," he explained. "Then Bran will come down from the wall, and what's left of the Starks will be united once more." She jerked her head around to face him again. For a moment he wondered whether she even knew that Bran was alive. If she didn't, he wasn't about to explain. He really had told her everything he wanted her to know. He considered confessing his love for Sansa, but swiftly changed his mind. That wasn't for her to know. That was something sweet and sacred between him and her alone. At least until they had both cleared their heads and decided on what it was they really wanted. So he stepped down from the dais, signaling for Ghost to follow, and walked out the door. Only the sound of that rasping voice of gravel stopped him in his tracks. "Forgive," was all she said,